Order, please. We'll now move on with the daily routine, beginning with presenting and reading of petitions. Just to close the loop on the petition presented yesterday by the Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank, I have reviewed the prayer and confirmed that it does contain the proper information. So the petition as submitted yesterday by the Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this Sunday, September 16th, Nova Scotians across the province will take part in the annual Terry Fox Run. And whereas this event commemorates the incredible accomplishments of Mr. Fox, who ran 5,373 kilometers across 6 provinces to raise money for cancer research, and whereas Mr. Fox's legacy and dream to raise funds and awareness continues today, with over $715 million raised in his name to support cancer research, therefore be it resolved that all members of this legislature recognize Terry Fox Run Day as a day to honour those who have battled cancer and strive to make a difference. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate. There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. With all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Was the Fraser Mills Fish Hatchery in Antigonish County was commissioned in 1928 and has been a continuous operation for 90 years. Whereas this hatchery sustains the province's stocking program, providing nearly 2 million speckled trout, brown trout, rainbow trout, Atlantic salmon in 400 lakes, streams across Nova Scotia. And whereas exceptional leadership has been provided by managers Murray Hill, Don McLean, Darren Morant, and currently Stephen Thibodeau, for operations, awareness, education, and research since the province assumed ownership in 1982. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House congratulate the management and staff of the Fraser Mill Fish Hatchery for their important contribution to Nova Scotia sport fishery and the occasion of their 90th anniversary. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. With all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas sickle cell disease is an inherited blood condition which affects approximately 5,000 Canadians and is a disease that primarily impacts persons of African descent, and whereas the Sickle Cell Disease Association of Nova Scotia is a non-profit organization that raises public awareness and support to Nova Scotians diagnosed with sickle cell disease, along with their friends and families. And whereas recognizing the month of September as Sickle Cell Disease Awareness Month provides an opportunity to promote increased awareness, education, and understanding for those who are affected with the disease and living with the disease. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House please join me in recognizing the month of September as Sickle Cell Awareness Month in the province of Nova Scotia and break the silence of Nova Scotians living with this disease across the province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. With all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas there are 137 types of blood cancers and related disorders affecting Canadians across this country, And whereas organizations like the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of Canada have facilitated much-needed research and advocacy, helping create programs and deliver services to support those affected by blood cancers. And whereas September is Blood Cancer Awareness Month, which aims to spread awareness, support the discovery of cures, and improve the lives of thousands of patients and their families. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge September as Blood Cancer Awareness Month. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this Sunday, the Polish Immigration Memorial Society, an honorary consul of the Republic of Poland for the Maritime Provinces, Mr. Jan Skora, will unveil the Polish Immigration Memorial Monument at Pier 21. And whereas the monument honors the immigrants from Polish lands who have contributed to the creation and development of Canada for over 300 years, and is especially significant given that 2018 marks 100 years since Poland regained its independence following the First World War. And whereas the monument is composed of two large natural rocks, a base of rough bluish local granite to symbolize Nova Scotia, with Polish sandstone set on top, and is adorned with a stainless steel eagle made from local artisans, which has a double meaning as the bird features on the Polish crest and pays tribute to the significance of the eagle for the Mi'kmaq people. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Consul Skora and his team on this significant project and thank the generous donors from Polish communities across Canada who made this monument a reality. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on September 13th, 2018, a second Deputy Speaker was elected by this House. Therefore, be it resolved that the Honourable Member for Lunenburg be the Deputy Speaker within the meaning of subsection 3-2 of the House of Assembly Management Commission Act and subsection 14-3 of the House of Assembly Act, and the annual salary of the Deputy Speaker established pursuant to the House of Assembly Act be divided equally between the two chairs of committees and Deputy Speakers. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. We'll now move on to introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Request permission to make an introduction.
Permission granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joining us here today in the East Gallery, two former colleagues, Staff Sergeant Steve McQueen from the Lunenburg County District Detachment and Constable Gord Giffen, also working out of the Lunenburg County District Detachment. I ask my colleagues here in the House to bring them a warm welcome.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Control of Body Armour.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Control of Body Armour.
Bill number 32, entitled An Act Respecting the Control of Body Armour.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act.
Bill number 33, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 34 of the Acts of 2001, the Lobbyist Registration Act.
That's a good one.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 34 of the Acts of 2001, the Lobbyist Registration Act.
Bill number 34, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 34 of the Acts of 2001, the Lobbyists Registration Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 441 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Statistics Act.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 441 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Statistics Act.
Bill number 35, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 441 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Statistics Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Police Street Checks.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Police Street Checks.
Bill number 36, entitled An Act Respecting Police Street Checks.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 300 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Elections Act.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 300 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Elections Act.
Bill number 37, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 300 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Elections Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. We'll now move on to notices of motion. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Johnny McLeod of Tony River, who recently retired from his employment at the Shiretown Nursing Home in Pictou after 40 years of dutiful and friendly service. A surprise party was held in Johnny's honour and attended by staff and friends. Throughout the years, Johnny performed custodian duties, but expanded to running errands and keeping track of inventory. He was most well known for the love of his job, his positive attitude, which lifted the spirits of all the staff and residents, and for being complimentary to everyone he came across at the facility. Johnny and his constant smile will be missed by all the Shiretown, and I wish the very best for him with his retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to make an introduction.
Permission granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the West Gallery, we're joined by my constituent, Andre Fenton. I'm going to ask him to stand while I read my member statement. Mr. Speaker, I rise to congratulate constituent Andre Fenton. His second book, but first young adult novel, is on shelves, and I encourage all members to buy it and give it, especially to young people. Worthy of Love is published by Nimbus and tells the story of a young mixed-race man who struggles with poor self-image. Andre Fenton is already an award-winning spoken word artist who has performed across Canada. He was featured in the movie Black Cop performing on the steps of Province House, and he's also a two-time NSCC graduate in screen arts and social services and a frequent invited speaker to groups both young and old. He's also really a very funny and sweet and insightful person, and I'm glad to know him. And he's only 23. I look forward to dropping by his book launch for Worthy of Love at the Bus Stop Theatre on September 25th, but I bought my copy yesterday and I'm already halfway through. Please join me in congratulating author Andre Fenton on the publication of Worthy of Love.
The honourable member for Guysborough Eastern Shore Tracadie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after many years of fundraising, planning and hard work, the Sherbrooke Opportunity Society Day program has happily opened their doors in the St. Mary's Educational Centre Academy. Program manager Lindsay Keith is now able to offer a productive learning environment for developmentally disabled clients in his new kitchen and open concept work space. The mission of SHOPS is to offer work programs that help strengthen the physical, emotional, intellectual well-being of each client. With this new location, they will now be able to receive training in useful life skills that will further their quality of life and enhance their self-esteem. Mr. Speaker, I want to extend a heartfelt congratulations to Ms. Keith, her team and volunteers on the opening of this new facility and wish them much success in their vision of providing new opportunities and lasting dignity to those who face special challenges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to acknowledge a good friend, Mandy Raftis, and her dedication to the seniors' lunch held each week in the community of Eastern Passage. In addition to dozens of other fundraisers she does for the people of our community, Mandy provides a weekly lunch for seniors and their guests in the church hall at St. Peter's Anglican Church. The event provides seniors with a wholesome lunch and a wonderful chance to socialize with others in our area. Each week, the group of 10 to 20 seniors have come to rely on Mandy's service and are very grateful for it. The seniors' lunch is held all year round and continues to grow each year. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in thanking Mandy for her compassion and kindness and for offering something so meaningful to such of those in our Cole Harbour Eastern Passage community. We owe her a great debt of thanks. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Armdale.
Mr. Speaker, over the summer I was pleased to stop by the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic to experience the Sea Dome firsthand. Thanks to 2 grants from the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage, the Sea Dome was able to deliver their 2018 season and move forward with market development activities. I had the pleasure of meeting with Fiona Diamond of Armdale to learn more about the great programming that the Sea Dome offers, including this year's Full Dome Cinematic Experiences, A Whale Story, and Blue Nose the Legend. Fiona and her husband Brooks are the driving force behind Canada Productions and Brooks Diamond Inc. and are recognized as top producers and promoters in the local entertainment and music industries. With decades of experience and an established partnership with Tourism Nova Scotia, their hard work is bringing the stories of the ocean to life for tourists and locals alike. I want to congratulate Fiona and Brooks Diamond on their success and encourage all members to visit the museum before October 13th to experience the Sea Dome. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria and the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize a young woman's passion for film, which led her to a career in filmmaking. Emily Fricker from Neils Harbour. During university, she discovered an interest in filmmaking and enrolled in the Nova Scotia Community College 2-year Screen Arts program. In 2016, Emily's film, The Bench, made it to the 2016 Atlantic Film Festival. Emily was noticed when her documentary entitled Neils Harbour, A Day Down Home, aired at several international film festivals. On July 16th, community members gathered at the North Islands Community Culture Centre for the debut of Emily's latest film, Lobster Sandwiches, which explored her grandfather's lifelong love of fishing. She donated all the proceeds from the event to the museum. I rise today to ask all members of this House to join me in congratulating Emily Fricker on success and to thank her for donating back to her community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to celebrate Cole Harbour. Our community has been celebrating community spirit, diversity, residents and business since 2007 at the Cole Harbour Harvest Festival. On September 8th, we took part in this great local festival once again, but the celebration this year was extra special. Every day, we have community champions, organizations, and businesses, and many others who do great work in our community. This year, Connections collaborated with over 15 such partners for our community to write the application for the Lieutenant Governor's Community Spirit Award. I am proud to share that Cole Harbour was one of 4 communities across Nova Scotia to receive the Community Spirit Award. This awards ceremony took place in collaboration with the Cole Harbour Harvest Festival in order to share this great achievement with many residents as possible. I wish to thank the community partners, Community Connections Network Nova Scotia, for bringing everyone together and for writing this application essay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, many hidden gems are located in our beautiful province. One of these treasures is the Trenton Steeltown Centennial Park. This popular park is located on the northeast edge of the town. The park offers a large number of walking trails within the 560-acre site, making it by far the largest public green space in Pictou County. Local residents use the park each day to socialize and engage in a healthy lifestyle. Trenton Park offers many attractions such as the outdoor swimming pool, amphitheatre, fishing ponds, cross-country skiing, fishing, and a feeling of tranquility. The Committee of Citizens from Pictou County, known as the Hemlock Group, have been preparing for a major development of this truly amazing area. Pictou County will be looking forward to additional opportunities at Trenton Steeltown Centennial Park. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to recognize the achievement of Celeste Williams, a young musical prodigy who was raised in Hubli before going on to achieve international fame as a concert soloist and concert master. She performs on both the violin and viola. Celeste was welcomed into the studio at Dalhousie University at the age of 6, and 2 years later made her solo debut with a symphony orchestra. She studied under a scholarship at Mozarteum University in Salzburg, Austria, and completed both bachelor and master degrees with highest distinction. While still in her 20s, Celeste has now performed in 16 countries in North America, Europe, and Asia, often as a soloist with major symphony orchestras. She became the youngest ever concert master of the World Youth Orchestra. She has been featured on radio and television channels in Canada, Austria, Hong Kong, and the Czech Republic. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in recognizing the work and achievements of Celeste Williams, not only for her exceptional achievements, but also for bringing international distinction to Nova Scotia and to Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize Pat Riley, a music instructor at Long and McQuaig in Dartmouth East and a community leader. Long and McQuaig Summer Rock is a music camp that allows youth from across HRM to develop skills and play music together. Successful Summer Rock students include Joel Plaskett and Matt Mays. As the camp enters its 34th year, Pat enters his 33rd year as camp director and longtime instructor. Pat is also a dedicated athlete and positive community member. Pat continues to play hockey and soccer, as well as having coached soccer for 31 years. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members of the House to join me in thanking Pat for being a role model for aspiring musicians and a great community leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable leader of the New Democratic Party on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the attention of the members to our having 3 guests with us this morning in the West Gallery. Robin Smith and Joy Shand and Paige Black. Paige is no newcomer here, having been a page in the House. And Robin Smith and Joy Shand are the co-chairs of the Provincial Young New Democrats in Nova Scotia. So I'd ask all the members to give them a warm hand.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night in Pugwash, a group of citizens led by Gerard Lucichin, VP at the Calgary-based Frontier Centre for Public Policy, hosted a rational debate on the merits of fracking, supposedly. Arguing against was retired Dalhousie University economics professor Michael Bradfield, and retired Judge Elizabeth Roscoe was called to be the moderator. The debate began at 7 at the Northumberland Curling Club, and we will be hoping, Mr. Speaker, that we hear from that event that fracking is not welcome in Nova Scotia and that the government is not considering introducing it to our beautiful province. Thank you.
The honourable member for Fairview, Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the efforts of the Joseph House Superstore, which recently raised nearly $6,000 for PC Children's Charities. The Joe House Superstore has been a great community hub in the Halifax area for over 25 years. The staff at this store continuously put on events to give back to our community. This past June, the store hosted a fundraiser barbecue which included lots of food, live music, and face painting as part of their Eat Together campaign. Proceeds of this fundraiser went to the March of Dimes Canada and their Conductive Education and Recreation Camp. This organization helps people of all ages with physical disabilities and rehabilitation, as well as advocating for equality. Throughout the day, various staff members also visited Joseph House School, where they handed out fruit, cereal, and juice to the children for breakfast and snacks. Atlantic Superstore continues to show their dedication to giving back to their local community, which is something that is greatly appreciated in our Fairview Clayton Park community. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the members of this House of Assembly join me in recognizing the hard work of the Joseph House Superstore and thanking them for all of their efforts on such a wonderful cause. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sackville Beaverbank.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And yesterday, of course, was the Stand Up Against Bullying Day. Mr. Speaker, as was stated yesterday, in 2007, grade 12 students Travis Price and David Shepard observed a young student being bullied simply for wearing pink shirt on his first day at school. The two Central King Rural High School students then brought and distributed 50 pink shirts for fellow students. Mr. Speaker, this anti-bullying initiative struck a chord with many, and today, 11 years later, students and staff in schools throughout the country wear pink on the second Thursday of September. Mr. Speaker, in 2012, Mr. Price noted that it may take a long time to put an end to bullying, but he was doing all he could do to combat it. Unfortunately, Mr. Price's statement was right, and bullying still exists 6 years later. However, as demonstrated by the number of members in this legislature wearing pink yesterday, he's also right that we're still making a difference, and so we are still making progress. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm honoured to congratulate Sable Cahill from George P. Vanier High School in Fall River. Sable won first place in the Turning Point writing contest, where she was up against 400 other students from schools across Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, Turning Points is an impactful program promoting character, awareness, resilience, and literacy among Canadian students through written expression. This program enables students to open up their self-significant events of experiences in their lives. Sable wrote her essay on a very personal story and how it changed her life. Mr. Speaker, I ask members of the legislature and myself to congratulate Sable on winning first place in Turning Point's writing contest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge Kelsey McLean, who works on the tugboat, the Atlantic Willow. The tugboat has an all-female crew that work the bridge, the engine room, and the deck as it chugs and tugs around Halifax Harbour and beyond. Kelsey McLean grew up in Marionbridge on the Myra River. Her grandfather is a fisherman out of Gabrouse, and she remembers her great-grandfather had his whole living room filled with model ships. Having studied at the Nautical Institute in Port Hawkesbury, she monitors in the engine room of the 95-foot Willow. 3 women work and live aboard the Atlantic Willow. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today to congratulate Kelsey McLean for choosing the career she so wanted and wish her the best of luck in her future endeavours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hammonds Plains Lucasville.
Mr. Speaker, after taking the bus to visit Mary Carmel Hickey in Glace Bay for the first time, Roderick Jessam received a blunt, unamused indication from Nanny Hickey that he should consider when the next bus departing for Sydney Pier would leave. Later, borrowing his brother's stylish new car, Roddy returned to the home and invited his bride-to-be and her grandmother to go for ice cream. Nanny Hickey, a diabetic, who was not supposed to have sweets, seemed to change her tune, was quick to befriend Roddy, and inquired about when he would visit next. Having lived in cities all over the nation, making their lives together, parenting 4 wonderful children, and proudly supporting 12 12 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, Roddy and Carmel, celebrate 60 years of marriage this week. I ask all members of the House to join me in wishing Nana and Grandpa a happy 60th wedding anniversary.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to recognize a Shelburne County resident for his outstanding achievements in dory racing. On August 18th, Walter Nickerson and his partner Willie Wells won the men's category of the over 50 division of the Lunenburg 66th Annual International Dory Races. The win marked his 16th championship. Dory racing is obviously a physically demanding sport, and it is not for the faint of heart. The fact that Walter won in over 50 categories is a testament to his character. On September 17th, the town of Lockport and the municipality of Shelburne will host a celebration at the Lockport Recreation Centre to formally recognize Walter's accomplishments. I ask all members of this House to join with me in saluting Walter's remarkable career, bringing pride and recognition to our country, province, and the residents of Queens Shelburne. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate the New Ross Family Resource Centre on the grand opening of their new daycare facility, which took place this past Tuesday, the 4th of September. The new daycare is licensed to provide care for 12 children from 18 months until school age. It will provide 3 full-time jobs in this dynamic rural community. To meet the needs of the working parents, many of whom commute to employment locations outside of the community, the daycare centre will be open from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m. The province, the municipality of Chester, and the Government of Canada help provide the financial resources for this new opportunity to serve this community. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of the House of Assembly to join me in congratulating the New Ross Family Resource Centre on the opening of this new daycare facility and to wish them well in this new endeavour. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to thank the Indian Beach Community Society that recently completed a major refit of Indian Beach. Improvements include a new septic system, drainage systems, a storage building, paving, parking lot upgrades, signage, and landscaping. Attention was given to an accessible gazebo, accessible playground equipment, and a special mat that will allow access to the beach and shoreline to people with disabilities. I would like to take this opportunity to applaud the volunteers of the Indian Beach Community Society and their partners for this wonderful transformation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, Life Schoolhouse is on unceded Mi'kmaq territory in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, in a house owned by Jennifer Brenton DeCoste and Scott DeCoste, but one that belongs to and welcomes the community. All kinds of Nova Scotians come through the front door of the DeCoste family home to teach and learn everything from leather bookbinding to basic carpentry skills, taught for free by community members from all across HRM. It answers a number of thorny questions coming from the community, including how to create meaningful connections for newcomers to Canada and also for those who have lived here for years and have never even met their neighbours. With crowdsourced funding, the DeCoste family organizes free classes and provides free use of their family home to build community. This is a part of their family's personal commitment to reconciliation in Canada, balancing the gifts of shelter and protection for their family with the responsibility to the land and all who share it. At Life Schoolhouse, facilitators from the community bring their knowledge and expertise and exchange it for bartered goods such as homemade food, plants, crafts, and more. Bartering breaks down the financial barriers many people face when trying to access education. In simple exchange, neighbours meet, share time and tea, connect and learn from each other in a simple but meaningful way.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of the summer, as it has been for countless summers beforehand, the fields at Herring Cove Junior High were packed with children, parents, and volunteers for the Herring Cove Sharks Soccer Club. Mr. Speaker, the field is full of the sound of hundreds of children laughing, yelling, and having fun. Mr. Speaker, none of this is possible without Debbie Clark and her volunteers. A big thank you to Debbie and her volunteers. And one of those children just happened to be my beautiful little daughter, Rafina. To Debbie and all her caring, wonderful volunteers, I want to thank you for creating a wonderful summer experience for hundreds of our local youth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, local artists of all ages in the St. Peters area have a new way to display and sell their art to the public. On June 12th, the village of St. Peters hosted an official unveiling celebration for its wall of art at the St. Peters Village Commission office on Denny Street. Participating artists who have their work on display have the option to sell their pieces, and in the early days of the project, 14 pieces of art had been sold and ongoing sales have been happening all summer. All proceeds go directly to the artists. Mr. Speaker, at this time I would like to offer a sincere thank you to the Village of St. Peters Commission and wish continued success to all artists involved in the Wall of Art project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, with the school year beginning, with many working parents scrambling to find before and after school care for their children, I want to bring the attention of the House to the incredible work of the Take Action Society of Dartmouth North. Take Action was formed by a group of Dartmouth North mothers who saw the need to serve their children in our community and to offer services that were lacking. They provide before and after school programs to kids, include picking up and walking the kids to and from school. They mentor youth in the area to become community leaders. They partner with other organizations to present family games nights, soccer, baseball, movie nights, and community potlucks. And they have the most beautiful community garden on the grounds of Harbourview School. Recently, Take Action has expanded and now runs out of both the Dartmouth North Community Centre and the Demetrius Lane Community Centre, where there's an amazing array of programs for children and adults. I want to congratulate Take Action on their expansion to 2 hubs of community connections and to thank all of the volunteers for their inspiring dedication to the people of Dartmouth North.
The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Byrne and Nicole Crevice, who opened Canada's first art maze, Byrne Art, Be Amazed, on August 30th in Maitland, in my constituency. The maze contains almost 1 kilometre of paths that incorporate a variety of artwork, including 3D sculptures, murals, mosaics, freestanding sculptures, and paintings decorating the walls. Nicole and Baron used the internet to recruit 85 volunteers from across the world to take part in the maze's construction. The maze was a lifelong dream of Byrne, and both he and Nicole have experienced many setbacks along the way. The maze has been under construction for the past 5 years, and the community is excited that it is now open for public viewing. Nicole states, "It is not just for kids. We see it as an outdoor art gallery. This maze can truly be enjoyed by the whole family." Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you and all members of this House of Assembly please join me in congratulating Byrne and Nicole Crevice on the opening of Byrne Art, Be Amazed Art Maze. And Mr. Speaker, it is amazing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to give an introduction.
Permission granted.
I'd also like to introduce Ms. Paige Black, who is a born and bred fellow Cumberland County lady. She's a recent graduate from the International Development School from Dalhousie. She is a former page here in the legislature and also former president of our PC Youth Organization. Please help me welcome Paige Black.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Dara Legier of Joggins branch of Royal Canadian Legion. Through his research, Dara was able to get 10 names of local soldiers lost in the First World War added to the cenotaph at Joggins. Volunteers with the Legion have been making repairs to the cenotaph, and a new walkway was built from the street to the base of the memorial, making it wheelchair accessible. Thanks to Dara's hard work and dedication, the cenotaph will be updated and rededicated in time for Remembrance Day this year. Mr. Speaker, the sacrifice of the brave men and women who are commemorated on our cenotaph is an important part of our history, and we are grateful for people like Dara to help us remember. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Almost a year ago, the compassionate and dedicated volunteers of the Truro Homeless Outreach Society opened up Hub House Truro. Hub House offers some of our most vulnerable citizens a place to rest and have a hot meal. With no dedicated municipal, provincial, or federal funding, Hub House has been running this past year entirely on the efforts of volunteers who are responsive to the unique needs of homelessness. I'm grateful to live in and to represent this kind of community. Mr. Speaker, a community that steps up and rises to the occasion and is willing to provide comfort and safety to those in need. I would like to thank the volunteers of Hub House Truro and congratulate them on a year of hard work because they are making all the difference. Thank you.
The honourable member for Clayton Park West.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize a constituent in my riding who seamlessly blended her love of sports and entrepreneurship. Samantha Morse is a member of the Masqua Aquatic Club and will be representing Canada at the World Marathon Kayak Championship in Portugal this September. She has also represented Nova Scotia at the Canada Cup twice in the past. Due to her love of water sports, Samantha started Paddle All, an initiative that promotes the inclusion of those with intellectual disabilities in canoeing and kayaking. Since then, many athletes have joined the free 8-week program that includes water paddling and dry land training. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the members of this House of Assembly join me in congratulating Samantha on her many achievements. Keep up the good work, Samantha. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, the helping hands of IOOF Lodge number 34 Oddfellows and Rebecca recently celebrated 140 years of volunteering and service to the community of River John. The lodge began on August 8, 1878. With 6 charter members. The organization currently has 21 members, and it is proudly noted that 4 of these members are under the age of 25. Just some of the initiatives undertaken by the Lodge include providing meals and toys to needy families, a $200 prize for graduating students at North Colchester High School, and adopt a resident program at the Maritime Oddfellows Home, and treats for local firefighters at Christmas time. Mr. Speaker, I and all of the people of Pictou West would like to thank the dedicated volunteers of the Helping Hands IOOF Lodge number 34 for their committed service to the community for over 140 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to update my colleagues in the House and all Nova Scotians of the incredible athletic accomplishments of Ben Brown of Cambridge, Nova Scotia. This summer, Ben broke into the top 15 in the world in the T53 wheelchair class in the 100-meter, 200-meter, 400-meter, and 800-meter events. Ben is now national champion in the 100-meter, 200-meter, and 400-meter by winning 3 golds at the Canadian Track and Field Championships held in Ottawa from July 4th to 6th. He also clinched a silver medal in the 800. He wrapped up the track season with a 100-meter win and 2 personal bests in Quebec City in July. He's particularly proud of his 5th-place finish in the 800-meter race, where he trimmed a half a second off his personal best time. I ask all members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating Ben Brown on his outstanding athletic achievements and wish him all the very best as he continues this remarkable career. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to make an introduction. Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to this House in the West Gallery Gary Bennett of Burlington. Gary was part of an unfortunate series of events in December 27, 2017, when his wife was mistakenly cremated, and greatly adding to the trauma for the family of her untimely passing. And I'd like to ask the House to both give our sympathy and our warm welcome to Gary today. Thank you.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate a woman who, for hundreds of children and their families in Liverpool, has been known as Mrs. Juanita. Juanita Wolf announced in June that she was retiring from running her preschool and after-school business. Over 500 children have passed through her door over the past 19 years, and she has been involved in teaching children for 35. Juanita truly saw each child as special and will be fondly remembered for the difference she made in their young lives and for preparing them for school and their life ahead. I am so pleased to congratulate Juanita for a job well done and to wish her a long and happy retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, for 12 years, the Emmanuel Players have been entertaining crowds at the Emmanuel Church Dinner Theatre. This year's production is I Dream of Jeannie, which tells the story of villagers of McIntosh Run in 1963. Sadly, the Emmanuel Players lost Dale Keegan this spring. Dale was one of the founding members of the Emmanuel Players. This year's production is dedicated to his memory. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of this House to join me in congratulating the Emmanuel Players on their 12th season and also extending our condolences for their loss of Dale Keegan. Dedicating this year's show to Dale is a fitting tribute to the man that gave so much to the Emmanuel Players and the community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the New Glasgow's Blue Nose Curling Club was established in 1853, making it the 3rd oldest club in the province and the 16th oldest in Canada. For the first 20 years, curling was played outdoors on the harbour and on various ponds and inlets. The first indoor facility was opened in 1874. Artificial ice was not available until 1937 at the North Provo location. For 30 years, beginning in 1968, the well-known club operated out of a joint facility with the Abercrombie Club. The club built its 5th location, a 4-sheet facility on Park Street, New Glasgow in 1990. Special thanks to all the presidents, board of directors and members that have shaped this club into one of the most competitive and popular curling facilities in the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Sam Kimball, an 18-year-old from LaHave, Lunenburg County, was chosen as one of 2 winners of the David Hearn Foundation Kia Grant. Sam is passionate about the game of golf. He plays about 5 times a week and works at Osprey Ridge Golf Course. He sadly lost his paternal grandfather to dementia in January, and his maternal grandfather is living with the same disease. Motivated by his personal connection to Alzheimer's and his passion for golf, he entered the essay and the contest, writing about how dementia has affected his family. Sam's essay was chosen among junior golfers from across the country who are involved in their communities and their local Alzheimer's Society. Sam won a $4,500 grant for the Alzheimer's Society of Nova Scotia and a trip to Ontario where he met David Hearn, a pro golfer, with a passion for supporting those on the dementia journey. Sam hopes that his grant will help other families. Congratulations to Sam Kimball on an outstanding young man who is making an effort to fight dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra, Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge the first triathlon on the Myra. About 100 people came to the Myra Boat Club, the start and the finish of the race, to cheer on the 152 competitors who started with a swim. Rick McDonald from Albert Bridge took part in his first triathlon on the recommendation of his trainer and his daughter, Julia McDonald, who won the Women's Olympic Triathlon at the event. It is a pleasure to thank all the volunteers who made this first of hopefully many more triathlons on the Myra a success. I believe that the beauty of this course and the community feeling surrounding the race will bring even more participants in the years to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Bedford.
Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate a Bedford business owner on her new venture. Olivia McMacken is known to many members of this House, and later this month she's going to host the grand opening of Forest Child Natural Beauty. Olivia created the line after she faced some health challenges while living in Toronto. She decided to reduce the chemicals she was being exposed to in her cosmetics, so she created natural, non-toxic cosmetics and body care products, which became the Forest Child Natural Beauty line. Olivia offers workshops like the September Self-Care one, which includes information on detoxification, as well as facials and a yoga session and more, and a $10 night for moms to help them choose the right skincare products and makeup. Forest Child Natural Beauty's grand opening will take place Saturday, September 22nd from 2 to 4 at 1094 Bedford Highway. And I wish Olivia every success in her new venture.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Sydney Mines native Brian Burton and his wife Sarah as they open Instinct Dog Behaviour and Training in North Sydney. This facility has its head office in New York and employs 25 people that do extensive training and behaviour advice. Thousands of dogs from all over the United States have come for multi-week courses over the past 10 years. This company has been featured in the New York Times and NBC Nightly News. I would like to take this opportunity to wish Brian and Sarah every success as they are about to expand into Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Antigonish.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to use this opportunity to share the story and remarkable success of a brilliant young woman and her company, Excitables. Hannah Chisholm has been allergic to milk, eggs, and nuts her entire life, and she had an idea to come up with a recipe that would allow those with allergens to enjoy eggs. With a little bit of research, she found the power of chickpeas. Her Excitables project is a plant-based egg substitute from chickpea flour. It's a dry mix formula that can be used as a substitute for eggs in any dish or recipe. And Mr. Speaker, Hannah has created a product that is free from eggs and other animal byproducts and free from all 8 of the most common allergens, including gluten. Her Excitables company has been gaining a lot of attention. She won $10,000 at the 100 Entrepreneurs Planting Seeds competition, $15,000 from Innovacor's Spark Innovation Challenge, and was chosen as one of 7 ventures to participate in the 2018 Summer Institute hosted by the J. Herbert Smith Center for Technology, Entrepreneurship and Management at UNB. Mr. Speaker, I wish her all the success in the future.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in mid-May, Miss Jamie Morrison of Lordways launched Out and About Respite, which operates the area's first adult respite program. Miss Morrison worked in long-term care for 16 years and has been working in private home care since 2016. She believes having a safe place for seniors can help ease pressure on full-time caregivers. The program is designed so that seniors benefit from interacting with others. During the day, participants have the opportunity to prepare and share meals together, play games, and engage in physical activity. Mr. Speaker, I would like to offer my congratulations and thanks to Ms. Morrison for her efforts in creation of this worthy initiative. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much for those member statements. I just want to take this last couple seconds to remind folks that the guidelines for statements by members indicate that statements may not be of a commercial nature, for example, directly promoting sales of a product, ticket, or event. So I note several statements today kind of cross that little bit of fine line, so I'll just keep that in mind when you're promoting the good things that are going on in your constituency. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Last week, the government used a significant portion of the speech from the throne to paint a rosy picture of our province's economy. In fact, the speech claims at one point there is a buzz about the province on the national stage and beyond, Mr. Speaker. There may be a buzz, but it's not a good buzz. RBC's provincial outlook says our province is facing economic headwinds that will keep it near the bottom of the pack in economic performance this year and next year. With the province's economy stagnating, why did this government fail to introduce a plan to create jobs?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the great success of the economy of the province and the great work Nova Scotians are doing, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing youth population is growing, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing jobs created in the tech sector, Mr. Speaker. I had the good fortune of being invited by all the major banks to come to Bay Street to talk about the great success of our province, wishing that other Canadian provinces would deal that they got to get their fiscal house in order, making sure they control costs of governance to make those investments. I was very pleased to go meet the global chairman of IBM, who recognized the best place in this entire country to do business is in this province. We're continuing to see major companies make investments. I'm looking forward to standing by them to make announcements into the future.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, RBC disagrees. The throne speech says that there are numerous indicators that Nova Scotia is performing at a high level compared to other provinces. But, Mr. Speaker, that was last week. This week, RBC says that Nova Scotia's economy will continue to lag behind the rest of the country. The province's stalling GDP will put it second to third last in the country this year and next year. What happened in the last week that would take Nova Scotia's economy from a high level to the bottom of the pack?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Federal Budgetary Office said the only Canadian province, only two Canadian provinces on staying on path were Quebec and Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, that's after its government inherited a $500 million deficit, Mr. Speaker, to bring us back to successive balanced budgets. Every credit rating, Mr. Speaker, has recognized the good work that's happening inside of this province. We're the only Canadian province to have their credit rating move up, Mr. Speaker. It's all positive signs. And what I'm hearing most importantly, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are borrowing and lending money to create economic opportunities and job creation in this province. And we're seeing it in communities from one end of this province to the other. And where it's showing up, Mr. Speaker, is young people are choosing to stay and work and build a life for themselves here in this province.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on her final supplementary.
We learned for the month of August the jobs report that unemployment has vaulted up to 5.9% from the previous month, and I will table this information. In fact, roughly 2 out of 3 people joining the workforce are unable to find a job in Nova Scotia. The RBC reported that a stagnant labour force is contributing to our underperformance, and the economic recovery in Alberta will be actually the one that restarts the flow for people to move back out there. Why should Nova Scotians trust that the Premier can offer them better options here than what they can find down the road?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. As she was reading that report, she'd also recognized full-time employment is at an all-time high in our province, Mr. Speaker. She would also recognize, Mr. Speaker, that youth retention is increasing, Mr. Speaker. She would also recognize, Mr. Speaker, we're seeing expansion in communities around economic development, job creation being led by the private sector. And she would also recognize, Mr. Speaker, that this government has got its fiscal house in order, is invested in programs that support individual Nova Scotians, organizations at the same time making sure the economic environment here is one that is attractive, Mr. Speaker, not only to Canadian organizations, but to global organizations who see this province as the bright light in the Federation.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
I'd like to continue with the note my colleague has sounded of hearkening back to the throne speech. The throne speech spoke about how we are at, the words used were a pivotal moment calling for progressive government policy. And certainly this is true. But I must say that in this session to this point, what we've seen from the government is more in the category of bureaucratic busy work and housekeeping, less pivotal and progressive, more piddling and puny. So it's a pivotal moment and is calling for progressive policy. And I want to ask the Premier, when is he going to bring forward his progressive plan to deal with the fact that we've got 20% of our hospital space taken up by people who are there because they're just waiting for long-term care?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for his question. I first of all disagree, and I think he owes all the great hard-working public servants an apology, Mr. Speaker, for suggesting they're just stirring around. I would also suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, I wish the honourable member had stood with us when we introduced 50 more long-term care beds in Craig-Breton. Instead, all he did was complain, Mr. Speaker. Fact of the matter is, we'll continue to roll out investments in health care from one end of this province to the other to ensure that the appropriate health care services are being provided in the appropriate communities at the appropriate time.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
The Premier disagrees with me, but I agree with him in the one thing. I agree that that throne speech is right, that this is a pivotal moment. It's a pivotal moment in which we in Nova Scotia are today 17 days away from again having the lowest minimum wage in the entire country, as Alberta and BC and Ontario have continued on the path towards $15. So it's a pivotal moment, calling for progressive policy. And I want to ask the Premier, will he tell us when he's going to table a progressive policy to get Nova Scotia's minimum wage out of the Canadian basement?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for the question. I noted he voted against the basic personal exemption increase that impacted the lowest income people in our province, Mr. Speaker. And I want to tell the honourable member what's progressive is actually running a government that can operate in the balance so that we're not borrowing on our credit card to pay for operations on a daily basis. That government buried successive generations, Mr. Speaker, leaving them with a debt. We had to deal with issues that were left behind by a party that simply doesn't understand what it means to govern, doesn't understand what it means to be balanced, and doesn't understand what it means to be fair, Mr. Speaker, and kind to all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
I don't think he really means progressive policy in a pivotal moment consists of a great deal more than the capacity to raise one's voice, Mr. Speaker. It is right. It is a pivotal moment calling for progressive policy. Now, we in the NDP, we have every day bring forward matters of progressive policy on climate change, on mental health, on children's rights, but we are facing a government that is set on jellyfish mode, formless, blobbish, and drifting. It's a pivotal moment. I want to know, where is the Premier's progressive policy for dealing with the fact that we've got, speaking on the subject of young people, the fastest rising tuition in the country, while in New Brunswick it's free if you're under 60,000.
That's right.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for the question. I want to tell him about progressive policy, Mr. Offering pre-primary to every 4-year-old in this province, which is government I want to tell him, Mr. Speaker, what's progressive policy is providing services in schools to ensure that we identify mental health issues at early onset so we can deal with them early on. That's progressive policy, Mr. Speaker. Progressive policy is, Mr. Speaker, when you make investments around ensuring that when you have the ability to make changes to the tax system, you impact those who need your support the most. When we changed the basic personal exemption, Mr. Speaker, he voted against it, Mr. Speaker. We continually divide when we want to modernize the health care system. He continues to complain about it, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is, Nova Scotians are with us, they're ready to work with us, and we're prepared to work with them.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. I was recently made aware of the Campaigns and Marketing Summit taking place in Washington this November. This summit is geared towards running more effective and successful political campaigns. I will table a notice that invites people to join participants already registered for the summit. Not surprisingly, the Nova Scotia Liberal Party is listed as a participant, and rightly so. Shockingly, though, the office of the Premier of Nova Scotia is also listed as a participant. Is the Premier using taxpayers' money to attend a summit specifically tailored to partisan campaign activities?
The Honourable Premier.
When is it? No, can I have a look? The answer to your question is, am I using the Premier's office of taxpayers' money to run campaigns? No. But, Mr. Speaker, I think at this particular it says the office is, Mr. Speaker, but I don't know when the date is. I'm in Asia in November. That's why we're in the House now. I made that very clear. I'll be traveling to Asia to continue to sell exports in their province. And I will continue to go and make sure that I make a representation on behalf of our province to continue grow the economy, create good jobs, and make sure that the rest of the world knows we're open for business.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this is a conflict. It's obvious to all Nova Scotians. This government can afford to take this trip and go to a summit, but they can't afford to go to Newfoundland and recruit doctors? It's pretty clear someone made a mistake, and it's mind-boggling that the Office of the Premier should need to spend taxpayers' money to also attend this event. Will the Premier tell this House who from his office is attending this summit and how much is being spent to send them to this partisan event?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member that no, I don't know who's going from my office, but I'm very proud of the fact that people who work for me actually tell the world they actually work for me in the Premier's office in Nova Scotia. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, if they go, it will not be taxpayers' money that will be sent in, Mr. Speaker. And again, I want to tell this House, as I've told many times before, I'm going to continue to travel, Mr. Speaker, to promote this province, to create economic opportunities, create exports on the rise, to make sure the global businesses recognize this province is open for business.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. This week, representatives from the Straight Richmond Hospital are seeking funding assistance from the municipalities. The hospital needs $2.3 million to redesign the entrance to the facility. Right now, outpatients wait in the same space as the ER patients, Mr. Speaker, which does put them at risk. Those seeking routine care are put at risk when they're with patients who might have the flu or other illnesses or infections, Mr. Speaker. According to the hospital, the health authority has offered less than 10% for the cost, about $185,000. So I'd like to ask the minister, is the minister concerned that this renovation to protect the health of patients is reliant on municipalities or even private donors?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for the question. As the member noted, the work for capital projects does go through the Nova Scotia Health Authority, which is responsible for the hospitals and the infrastructure providing care to Nova Scotians from one end of the province to the other. The way the process works, Mr. Speaker, is as they assess all of the capital needs that they have for our healthcare system, they bring forward the requests, and we consider what we can do based upon the budgeting process. We allocate a budget as part of that. Our budget was tabled in the spring, Mr. Speaker, and the health authority is working within that for their capital decisions.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amount offered by to the Strait Richmond Hospital by the Nova Scotia Health Authority is even more concerning when you consider that the health capital budget has been underspent by more than $72 million over the course of the past 3 years. The renovation, Mr. Speaker, at Strait Richmond will require only 3% of that unspent funding over the last couple of years. So I'm wondering if I could ask the minister, why has the government failed to spend the money budgeted for improvements to our hospitals when the communities are at need, like at the Strait Richmond Hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to explain to the member and all members of the legislature how capital projects work. Mr. Speaker, these projects are often complex. They do get developed based upon a projection of when work will take place and an estimate of the cost of that work. Frequently, Mr. Speaker, there are delays in that work. That's why the budget doesn't get fully spent in any given year. However, Mr. Speaker, I assure the member that, in fact, the budget does get spent. The timing may just be offset. So the figure that was referenced for the capital budget being underspent in past years, as the Finance Minister has noted in fiscal updates, those delays are based upon delays in the project, but the money gets spent as the projects get completed.
The Honourable Member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for Service Nova Scotia. On December 27, 2017, while attending his wife's funeral, Gary Bennett discovered that Sandra had been mistakenly cremated. This mistake added to the grief of her untimely passing, and I can only imagine the feeling of knowing that your loved one's last wishes were not followed and you were denied your chance to say goodbye. Mr. Bennett is here today because he wants to make sure that no one else suffers a tragedy like this. However, legislation that was promised in the spring was not forthcoming, and I will table that. My question for the minister is, will the minister commit to introducing legislation this session to protect Nova Scotians from funeral home errors like those experienced by the Bennett family?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question, and I certainly want to welcome Mr. Bennett here to the gallery, to the House today. Every once in a while in government, and I guess in life, you see things that are heart-wrenching, that are absolutely patently unacceptable, and that are terrible for a system in which we're bound to protect. This was one of those times for Sandra and the family. It's bad enough that this happened as part of life, that she passed away untimely, and to go through this is something that should never happen in the province. So this is one that we went to work with immediately with the Funerals and Directors Association, the Embalmers Association, the funeral services, to get this right. I'll tell the Mr. Bennett, his family, and the member opposite, and all Nova Scotians, that we are introducing legislation on Tuesday that will ensure that this never happens again. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kings North.
I'd like to thank the Minister for that answer. Mr. Speaker, subsequent to the unfortunate events of Mrs. Bennett's treatment, Mr. Bennett had opportunity to advance a complaint with the Nova Scotia Board of Registration of Embalmers and Funeral Directors. While the board did hear the case, Mr. Bennett and his family chose not to participate. They made this decision because they were told that while representatives of the funeral home would be able to question the Bennett family, the family would not be permitted to listen to the testimony of the funeral home staff nor ask any questions themselves. That just didn't seem fair. My question for the minister is, will the minister confirm that his department will address a more fair and transparent complaint review process for the Nova Scotia Board of Registration of Embalmers and Funeral Directors in future legislation.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do again thank the member for bringing this to the floor of the House. The answer to that question is yes. Along the way with this process, with the Bennett family, there were things that we've identified in this procedure, the public hearings, that just didn't seem right. And I think that the Bennetts, again, going through this loss of their loved one, had to experience these things over and over. So very unfair. The public hearings will have a much different structure, to your point, honourable member, and to the points that the families have made. It will be much more open, transparent, and give the opportunity for families to have their say. So this legislation will reflect a much better picture of how this process should work. We're going to hold more people accountable, not one person, the entire the facility, the owners, everyone that's responsible for having these procedures in place and followed have to take accountability. This shouldn't follow one person. This is an organizational question, and this can never happen again for this type of facility for a funeral home. So we will reflect a lot of that we've learned through this process, and I'm sure the member will be on hand to see some of those details. And I think we got this right because, again, this can never happen any other time here in Nova Scotia. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, teachers have informed me that attendance problems are persistent. Many students skip school because they don't face any real consequences. This government introduced a province-wide student attendance and engagement policy which came into effect October 1st, 2017. Policy was intended to help improve student attendance through a balance of supports, incentives, and consequences. There's great skepticism that this policy is having the desired effect. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, does the Minister believe that this policy has met all expectations? And if the answer is yes, can he provide the data to this House supporting his answer?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We're very proud of the fact that we do have the first province-wide attendance policy in Nova Scotia under our government, and we have that because teachers came together on the Council to Improve Classroom Conditions and actually wrote that policy themselves, Mr. Speaker. This was a process that was led by our educators. They also decided to invest in attendance support employees who would help students overcome whatever their individual obstacles are in terms of attending school. And most of the information I have right now is anecdotal on the impact of this policy. The information I've been receiving seems to be positive at this rate, particularly in the Tri-County. I know attendance levels have increased. But if there is data that the member has that he would like me to take a look at, I'm happy to see that, because we have to continually evolve our policies to make sure they are meeting the changing needs of our students.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, teachers want to see their students succeed, and we know that student success is linked to regular student attendance. The student attendance and engagement policy is a province-wide policy that sets a clear expectation for students, parents, and teachers. However, it's been said that it doesn't allow much flexibility in individual cases, and what works to engage one student may not work for another. My question, Mr. Speaker, does the Minister believe the policy gives teachers, guidance counsellors, and administrators better access to tools to deal with the root causes of absenteeism?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We're trusting our teachers. They are the ones that develop this policy. There is flexibility built in to identify and address the individual causes that are impacting a student's attendance, whether it's issues at home, whether it's social anxiety or anxiety linked to work, whether it's bullying. Or whether it's other factors that that may be there, Mr. Speaker. So there is flexibility built within the policy. We do collect data on attendance, so we are able to take a look at those provincial numbers, but I just don't have them available for the member today. But any advice the member has, any data that he wants me to take a look at, I'm sure that will help us continually improve our policy framework so we're meeting the needs of our students.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
A question for the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, I've been approached by a number of beef farmers in my area about the need to improve genetics in their bulls. So, Mr. Speaker, I know the economics of this. Nova Scotia beef farming can be more expensive relative to other areas of the country, yet they're selling beef at Canadian beef market prices. I'll ask the Minister, does the government believe beef farmers need a bull bonus?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a very good question the member brings forward. For about the last 50 years, there's been genetic enhancement in the industry for bulls, and that work we're examining now, and we're looking at the best possible way to do it.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the Federation of Agriculture is interested in having some of these measures, including a bull bonus, and I will table that. It's a letter that they've asked for that. Mr. Speaker, some of our bulls have lost their enthusiasm. Now, they should not be criticized for that. It happens. I may say they've lost the spark in their eye. They've lost that loving feeling. But the minister can fix that, Mr. Speaker. So I will ask the minister, why not offer a bull bonus now, or at least start to build it into the spring budget?
I'll check my list of parliamentary terms here first. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
That was quite an enlightened question, I must admit. We're very, very important to make sure we have the best beef herd we can have in the province, and we're doing a lot of work around that, and we will continue to do that in conjunction with the Federation of Agriculture. We've met with them on several occasions regarding this, and also to the beef producers in the province.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Yesterday in this House, the Minister accused me of defending the status quo and special interest groups. Mr. Speaker, if the status quo means students being able to access safe, reliable transportation to get to school on time, and if special interest groups are parents, then I suppose he's correct. Parents like Sarah Crawford, mother of 7-year-old Ava, who has to cross a busy highway with no crosswalk or traffic lights, 7 years old, on her walk to school because she's not eligible for busing. Ms. Crawford has contacted the Regional Centre for Education and Stock, but she's gotten nowhere, and I'll table that. Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain how parents like Ms. Crawford will be included in the minister's promised review of school busing?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In fact, we're collecting all the concerns that are coming into our regional office, to the department right now. There's a lot of good information and data there. Parents registering their concerns daily over the course of the last couple weeks, and that will help us move forward in a way that will address them. The review is going to look at best practices. We're undergoing that right now within this province and within other jurisdictions in the Federation, with the intent of ensuring that every single parent, every single student in this system has reliable, safe, efficient busing that gets them to and from school on time. Mr. Speaker, we know we have some work to do, and we're committed to doing it.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, this entire situation is ridiculous. Last night I heard from a parent who emailed the minister about busing concerns. She's not received a response. After seeing no bus for her students for her children for close to a week, she's gotten an update from Bus Planner that now says her child's bus will pick them up at 8:34. The school bell rings at 8:35. Mr. Speaker, what parents need are local representatives who know their neighbourhoods, who understand their roads, who can respond to their concerns. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give the minister another chance to explain how, aside from registering complaints, parents are going to be involved in the review of school busing.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Every single parent has received direct communication means given to them so they can get to the regional office and speak to a person immediately. We met with Stock Transportation in the region last night. Call volumes are decreasing. That is a positive sign. I do want to remind the member that we are at about 98% of our buses being to school on time and getting home on time, but we know that we have to do better. The situations that the member and other members have referenced, the situations that we've heard about in the media, the concerns that are coming into the department and the region are unacceptable. And we've made that clear to the provider of the service. We've expressed our expectation that every single parent needs to have reliable busing service on time that's safe, and we intend to deliver that to Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health and Wellness. Mr. Speaker, those providing hospice and palliative care in Victoria County cover 1,700 square kilometres of territory. 1,700 kilometres, Mr. Speaker. For a territory this size, there's only one part-time hospice nurse and one doctor for 1 day a week with no backup for vacation or sick time. The caseload, however, remains steady at 22 patients, while CBRM, which has a similar caseload, has a full-time nurse assigned just to manage the work involved. The Minister of Health and Wellness has deferred, he's talked around questions, and he's been intentionally vague in his responses to this House. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister again to explain why there's such a discrepancy between two municipalities with the same caseload numbers.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for raising the question. As the member would know, the Nova Scotia Health Authority provides the services for frontline health care in the province. The work they do includes the delivery of palliative care at the end of stage, end of life care for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. They continue to review the services that they offer throughout the province in communities, and they make adjustments. I want to remind the member that when he raises questions of discrepancies in services, that work continues is part of the structure of the Nova Scotia Health Authority, bringing together and standardizing practices that used to be delivered by 9 separate organizations throughout the province under one single standard approach.
The Honourable Member for Victoria Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, the bottom line here is that the Hospice Society of Victoria County requires a full-time nurse. The Hospice Society wrote to the Minister's office on June 15th and has yet to receive a response, something we here in the House are used to every day. And I'll table that letter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, end-of-life care is a compassionate art and science that extends well beyond the simple provision of treatment to patients. The Minister has an opportunity to ensure that anxious and grieving families in Victoria County receive support on how they keep their dying loved ones comfortable, and home support services to ensure that an individual can die with dignity on their own terms. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, will he provide the Hospice Society of Victoria County a full-time nurse? A simple yes or no will do.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I'd mentioned previously, the delivery of healthcare services and the allocation of those resources to ensure the care and delivery of those services in communities across the province is exactly the work the Nova Scotia Health Authority is tasked to provide. We do rely on the Health Authority and the experts within that space to identify what the needs are for the delivery of care in communities, Mr. Speaker. So the answer to the member's question is very clearly, as the Health Authority continues to review and identify the palliative care needs and services to be provided in communities across the province, they will make the necessary adjustments.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister responsible for the Emergency Management Office, the Minister of Municipal Affairs. For the second time in 3 years, residents of southwest Nova Scotia are experiencing severe drought conditions. Wells run dry, and more continue to run dry every day. Hundreds of residents need assistance in gaining access to sufficient water supply to operate their homes. They can't shower, they can't wash their clothes, they can't wash dishes, or even flush their toilet. And like I said, this is the second time in 3 years, and definitely the prevailing weather patterns have definitely played a bit of a trick to those residents. Can the Minister share what his department is doing to bring some relief to the residents of southwest Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to first start by thanking those municipal units, those affected areas of southwest Nova Scotia. They're volunteers. The fire service down there has been doing great service in the last number of weeks, supplying water to those affected communities. Yesterday morning, I had the opportunity via conference call to speak with the wardens of Yarmouth, Barrington and Argyll to discuss further their requests and clarify their immediate needs. From there, directed our provincial EMO centre to begin immediately coordinating efforts for drinking water and for larger non-potable amounts of water to be sent out to Argyll, and that we will also discuss further in the long term what that assistance may look like. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
And I thank the Minister for his answer on that. I know there's many people that are involved in this process, but it's a situation that is getting worse. I mean, we did have a great range of education. As the neighbouring MLA, I'm sure his constituents are enduring some of the same conditions. In the drought of 2016, facilities around the area were open to those affected. And I'm specifically thinking those of Mariner Centre in Yarmouth and area schools. The decision on schools at the time fell to the school board to help the municipalities come up with some options. And as I understand, that decision will now fall under the minister and his department. So I'm asking the Minister of Education, has the minister been involved in any discussions to make schools available, and I mean the Plymouths and the Yarmouth Highs and those kinds of things, outside of classroom hours, and is it something that is under consideration?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've been in contact with the district in my constituency, Yarmouth. We've got them in contact with EMO. To date, we have not had any requests to open up school facilities, but of course, if that is needed, we'll be happy to take a look at that and take action. Our regional executive director, Paul Ash, is very responsive to local concerns as they come in. He's been doing a great job managing that office on our behalf, and we'll be sure that the system is there to support those in need.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation. I was recently contacted by a business who frequently bids on construction tenders posted by the department. They told me that they believe there has been an increase in the number of tenders that are posted, cancelled, and then reposted. As I'm sure the Minister can appreciate, construction firms dedicated resources to submitting these bids and become very frustrated when they are cancelled. Can the Minister explain why his department would tender, cancel, re-tender, and sometimes cancel again?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for the question. And it's an excellent question. First of all, we're very appreciative in the department of the great work that our local contractors do for Nova Scotians across the piece. And as part of that process is a very refined effort to make sure that we are defining what it is that we want, that it is handled in an excellent way. Our colleagues at procurement help us in that regard. Sometimes specifications might change, and in the interest of making sure there's a level playing field for all the bidders, things do get rescinded, and we try and take as short a time as possible to get them back on the market. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
These are firms that are in competition with one another and have every motivation to bid the best price they can offer. If under those circumstances no firm can do the work at the tender price, then the problem is with the price or the way the tender explains the work. And that falls on the Minister's department. The life cycle of these tenders is such that quite often, a cancellation and then re-tendering means the project is deferred until the next construction season. Meanwhile, Nova Scotians go out with key pieces of infrastructure, creating sometimes safety hazards. So can the Minister explain why some of the tenders put out by his department are simply unrealistic in the current market?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly understand the frustration that the contracting community would feel about some of these processes. We don't control all the variables. As an instance, Mr. Speaker, the price of liquid asphalt this year has escalated by over 40% within the tendering period, which has really driven some of our numbers on asphalt quite crazy, and as a result, any particular alteration to a contract that exceeds 15%, our procurement rules require that we go back to the market so that we don't injure a contractor by awarding a contract which we know is escalated and would exceed that level, and other people might feel excluded. Thank you.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is for the Minister of Environment. When the Premier was seeking re-election, he promised Nova Scotians that a Liberal government would maintain the ban on fracking. But instead, his government has reignited the debate. In January, the former Minister of Energy said it was a good thing to stimulate discussion. And now fracking is filling our opinion pages once again. It's taking up space that could be dedicated to the conversations that we need to be having in this province about our best path to a green economy. So my question, Mr. Speaker, for the Minister is this. Does she believe that fracking is compatible with protecting the environment and taking action on climate change?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for bringing this subject to the foreground today. Actually, in my role as the MLA for Hands East, I'm very familiar with the issues because, the Conservative government at one time had brought fracking forward, and during the NDP time, fracking was done in the Kennecott area, and it was left with fracking wastewater ponds that with no plan to deal with those ponds. Our government actually cleaned up the site, Mr. Speaker, so we've made a commitment to that. Beyond that, Mr. Speaker, there is a moratorium on fracking in Nova Scotia with no plans to change that. Thank you.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm glad to hear her say that there are no plans to change, and I will definitely be holding her and this government to that, and so will our NDP caucus. And I believe that any fracking that was taking place in Kennecott was done before the NDP actually became government. Mr. Speaker, 4 years ago, we went through a proper formal consultation with Nova Scotians on fracking, and Nova Scotians overwhelmingly said no to fracking. The Wheeler report was clear. There's neither the evidence nor the community support to justify the environmental risks of fracking. This is a route that we've taken before, and it's a dead end. We need to move on to talking about green jobs and renewable energy. So my next question for the minister is this. I'd like to ask the minister, when can Nova Scotians expect to see her government's green jobs plan?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member again for that question because it gives me the opportunity to really highlight all the green jobs that are happening in Nova Scotia. We're seeing companies like Carbon Cure who are putting carbon into concrete, which is an amazing proposal. We're seeing all the things that are coming across my desk now, which are allowing the possibility of black bag garbage being used as energy, and eventually we won't even need landfills. These are happening right. The green energy industry is alive and well in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and will continue to be. This government promotes it. We will continue to promote it for a better Nova Scotia and a better environment for all Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the family's written consent, my question is to the Minister of Community Services. In July of 2018, Child Protective Services and the HRM Police Department raided the home of a new mother and her parents based on an apparent positive methadone test and a false DCS report that a 7-year-old was home alone. CPS required the immediate removal of the baby and the 7-year-old. An ER doctor at the IWK said that neither the mother nor the baby showed any signs of drug use or exposure. Less than a week later, the Department of Community Services called to say that there had been a mix-up. The positive test belonged to someone else. When the province removes children from a family, they have to have more than bad data. My question to the minister, is it the department's policy to take a breastfeeding baby away from her mother based on one positive test that was not supported by the doctor, and in this case, turned out to be a test that belonged to someone else?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I want to thank the honourable member for her question and for bringing that to me. As the honourable member knows, I don't speak on individual cases because I don't always have all the facts at my fingertips. What I can assure the honourable member is, if she would like to bring that to the department, we'd be happy to look into that for her.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the minister for her answer. I did bring it to her department's knowledge, so I'll encourage her to speak with them. While I appreciate the really hard work of all the CPS staff As you can imagine, this family was incredibly traumatized by this experience, especially when it took another 3 weeks before those 2 children were returned home to the mother and the grandparents. In addition, the grandparents were forced to pay a lawyer to represent them, only to find out that a drug test was not their daughter's. DCS has yet to issue an apology to the family and have not reimbursed the family for their legal fees. My question to the minister is this: will the minister refund the outstanding balance of their legal fees to this family, who should never have been forced to pay this amount? And will the minister personally apologize today to this family for the trauma their government departments have inflicted on all of them? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
As the honourable member knows, I can't deal with an individual case here in the House, again, because I do not have all the facts before me. What I can tell the honourable member is that I have indicated to her that the department will look into this further. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, this question is for the Minister of Community Services. Last week, I met Henry Pettigrew. He is 62 years old, blind in one eye, requires hearing aids, has a heart condition, and 3 bulging discs in his back. It is nearly impossible, Mr. Speaker, for him to find employment. He was on income assistance but was removed 3 months ago because the address on his driver's license was different than where he was living. He has no money for his food or for his medications and is having difficulty affording the necessities of life. The question for the minister is, will the minister address the decisions made to remove someone from income assistance and pharmacare, taking away life-saving medications? Thank you, Mr.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
As the honourable member knows, I can't deal with individual cases here in the House because I don't have all of the facts of the case before me. What I can guarantee is that any time that there is an issue like that, if the honourable member would like to bring it to my office, I would be happy to have staff sit down and look at the particular case. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you. Thank you to the minister. And I have addressed it locally but haven't gotten a favourable response for Henry, and I am worried about him. I did take Henry to Nova Scotia Works in hopes that they could assist him in finding employment that would suit his physical limitations, but I'm not confident that's going to be able to happen. Henry's feeling helpless. He's worried. He's not taking his medication that he needs for his heart condition. He's left with no income, no job, no medications, and no hope. Transitioning from income assistance to employment is a struggle for many Nova Scotians, and I'm wondering if the minister could look at options before someone is removed from income assistance, to have the caseworkers in community services working with people from Nova Scotia Works, working with pharmacare, so that people are not left without medications, without money, and without hope.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I want to thank the honourable member for that question. In fact, that is exactly something that we're working on, sort of transitioning us away from the kind of old school system that we've had to one that is more compassionate, more accessible to folks, so that they are not penalized when life's difficult circumstances intercede. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we know and all Nova Scotians know, our healthcare system in this province is in crisis. We see it in this government's reckless dismantling of healthcare services in Cape Breton. One family doctor on the north side was finally able to retire once she had the peace of mind that she had someone else to take her patients. But, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the doctor who has taken over the practice has had to retire due to a sudden illness, leaving a whopping 5,000 patients without a family doctor. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, what would the minister say to these 5,000 patients? What should these 5,000 patients do when they require a family doctor's note to access services such as MRIs, specialist referrals, healthcare professional referrals that walk-in clinics can't provide?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for raising the question. As the member would know, that there There are times in professions across the province where if someone's health takes a turn, as the member noted in this case, that those are circumstances outside of anybody's control. And I think Nova Scotians, including the patients of the physician he referenced, would understand that. With respect to responding to the situation, Mr. Speaker, the Nova Scotia Health Authority continues not just with its recruitment efforts, but also with evaluating and identifying opportunities to improve recruitment efforts. As the Department of Health and Wellness, we continue to invest and make changes, listening to frontline healthcare workers. We've increased our investment in compensation, our locum programs, Mr. Speaker. We've taken a number of steps based upon the feedback we've heard, and we'll continue to do so.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, those 5,000 patients are asking for an answer of what to do when they need the services of a family doctor. Not how great they're doing and what the recruitment process is. They want to know what to do. Mr. Speaker, the truth of the matter is we have a doctor shortage in this province, and it's affecting our most vulnerable, our hardworking men and women and our seniors at their moment of need. The stories that I hear from my constituents each and every day are heartbreaking because the system has failed them and their government is failing them. To add more stress, people are concerned that this government hasn't shared the plan to replace lead physician recruiter and the former vice president of medicine in integrated care from the Nova Scotia Health Authority, if they have a plan to do it. Expanding hospitals while closing others will not address the doctor shortage crisis for most of the 100,000 Nova Scotians. So my question to the Minister of Health is, will he travel to North Sydney with me on September the 23rd to attend a community meeting and hear firsthand what it's like not to have a family doctor? And Mr. Speaker, a simple yes or no will do. Yes or no.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the member should be aware, we established about 2 years ago an 811 Need a Family practice list, Mr. Speaker. This is a registry that allows Nova Scotians to let the province know that they are in need of primary health care services. We make use of this list, Mr. Speaker, to identify where the needs are in communities across the province.
Please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
That information helps us and our partners at the Nova Scotia Health Authority when they are doing recruitment initiatives, Mr. Speaker. We try to match physicians and nurse practitioners to those communities as part of the recruitment process. We've been having success, Mr. Speaker, with even, I believe, just in the last month, in the month of August, about a dozen new physicians that were recruited by the Health Authority. Mr. Speaker, we are listening, we are adapting, and we are continuing our recruitment efforts to improve primary care access across this province.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Lands and Forestry. As the province continues to sit on the recommendations of the Leahy report, the same short-sighted policies that the report condemns are continuing to happen. This week we learned that in West Hants there is a proposed cut on Crown land in a designated deer wintering area. Local hunter Mark Keogh of Upper Vaughan says that the remaining patch of mature forest is crucial for deer survival and also important for mainland moose, owls and martens. Mr. Speaker, the Leahy report...
Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. Just before we go on to government business, the Honourable Minister of Education on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Drumlin School is open for water. It's been open as of yesterday from 6 to 8. Just wanted to inform
please. That is not a point of order. That's a disagreement of facts. The Honourable Government House Leader.
I knew it wasn't for it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call resolution number 50, Rule 60, Order, Forms and Procedure.
We'll now call resolution number 50. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I read this resolution on Wednesday, September 12th. It's quite lengthy and involves many subsection changes, but ultimately what the resolution entails is the establishment of a standing committee on health, as well as the merger of standing committees of natural resources and economic development. And I now move that resolution.
The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the government and the government House Leader for bringing this resolution forward. For a number of years, I think opposition parties have been asking for a place to really bring their health concerns forward in committee form. Many times we end up having to discuss it, of course, in public accounts because it's the only opportunity that opposition has to actually bring these issues forward. But as anything, and I think my colleague from Sackville-Cobequid mentioned it in his, I believe, scrum yesterday or the day before, you know, the devil is in the details on this one. When we set up a committee, what kind of committee is it? And I know the member for Inverness will speak in a few moments, and he'll talk about his experiences in public accounts and the way he thinks things should work there. And I do agree with him. There are mechanisms available to us to discuss the issues I think that are important to us that come forward from our constituents when they relate, of course, to health. The majority of them do end up in public accounts because it's our only opportunity to truly bring those forward. There has been no health committee as such. We've had the Community Services Committee, which is the one that should have encompassed healthcare issues. But because of the limitations of that kind of committee, they were still coming to public accounts. Because it is a dollars and cents discussion that we try to have often at that committee. So that being said, you know, I think we have an opportunity here to maybe think things differently when it comes to the supports needed for that kind of committee, the frequency of that kind of committee, and how that committee affects the other committees. Like, we don't want to see a health committee brought forward into the House of Assembly, and if it's just simply a standing committee as human resources, natural resources, those kinds of things, and then take away our opportunity in public accounts to ask the questions in a different way because they are different. So there are many details that we're going to have to consider as we go forward, and I hope the government and the government House Leader are open to a discussion on how this might operate. You know, is once a month enough? Is there an opportunity for emergency issues to be brought forward? Will we have the capability to compel or subpoena individuals to come forward to it? So there's questions that we do have to make sure that this is a new and improved kind of committee for this House of Assembly, because it's been a long time since we've created one here in the House of Assembly. So with those few comments, I know the Minister, the House Leader will speak a few moments on that, but I know I've had the reassurance from them that we'll all sit down and have the opportunity to you know, battle out those details. So thank you very much.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise to speak for a few moments on this resolution. The creation of a health committee, I think, is definitely timely here in Nova Scotia. We know that there has been many challenges over the last number of years within our health sector that I think Nova Scotians want us as elected officials to make sure that we're bringing their concerns to the floor of the legislature, but not just there, to the committee structure that we have. And as was stated by my colleague, health kind of doesn't fall under any of the standing committees that we have currently, and often the default is to, as opposition parties, for example, but even government members on public accounts have brought forward health initiatives, health topics, health issues to the Public Accounts Committee, so that, you know, we can discuss it, we can engage with officials that really do the daily work of providing health services to Nova Scotians. The ability to come forward, answer questions, bring details of a new program, how is the money being spent in healthcare, is it appropriate, is it meeting the needs of Nova Scotians? And when we look at surely just look at the budget of health, where we're over $4 billion, you know, pushing that 50% mark of our overall budget, it definitely warrants, I think, a committee like a health committee to be established in our system that we have here in the province of Nova Scotia. We know if we look at other jurisdictions, both on a provincial level and on a federal level, health committees have been around for some time, and it begs the question of, you know, we're glad to see that the initiative here brought forward by the government is to create a committee for health, but is there an opportunity for us to truly transform our committee system on the ability to really truly reflect and respond to the issues that Nova Scotians face every day. So if you look at the House of Commons, for example, there's a number of committees, from safety committees to committees that deal with child and youth initiatives. I mean, it's wide open. And I've been here 15 years, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to be at this point. And we haven't really had any changes in those 15 years to the committee structure. So I think this is an opportunity for us. I know that the government House Leader and my colleague in the Progressive Conservative Party, the House Leader for their party, we have been working over the last number of years on a number of initiatives to try to make sure that we can get cooperation around issues that Nova Scotians are facing with something that is being delivered in the context of government initiatives or really legislative initiatives. We look at the boundary review, for example. We worked extremely hard to try to make sure that each concern of each caucus was met, and that the concerns of the constituents that we see and hear from every day, and there's been a number of occasions of that. Listen, I'll be the first one to say that we don't always agree in the legislature here. I know it's a shock for people, but there are initiatives like this that we should be working together on, and it really, I think, can show Nova Scotians that, listen, yes, we may represent our constituents and we may represent certain political parties, but I think overall our main priority and concern should be the well-being of our citizens here in Nova Scotia, and that means having a good, robust committee structure, public policies, regulations, legislation, all that. And here's an opportunity, I think, for us to continue the discussion. I know this resolution pertains specifically to a health committee, but there may be more changes that are needed. So I respect and appreciate the comments from the government House Leader that we will look at the details of this health committee and the makeup, and try to make sure that we can come to some kind of agreement, understanding of how it will look and what the makeup will be. But more importantly, I think what's at stake here is making sure that Nova Scotians have an ability to see the legislative process, not only just in legislation that we see in that process, but in a structure that we have here at the House of Assembly, in the legislature, of a good committee structure that can address concerns. And I want to echo the comments of my colleague around the need potentially for the Health Committee, for example, to meet, if it's decided that it's a once-a-month committee that meet, like the other committees, that especially in health, that there are emerging issues of concern that should be addressed quickly, that the committee should have the ability potentially to have an additional meeting, so that it's not put off for months on end while we maybe have a subcommittee on agenda setting. That it delays things, Mr. Speaker. And I think this committee of all should have that ability to maybe react when something happens in one of our communities that we represent in the health sector, or something is of dire concern of having to have an issue or some resolve. So I would hope that could be within the discussion we have with the government House Leader, that we make this committee the best possible committee to understand the issues in health, one, but to react to concerns that Nova Scotians bring to all of us, as we represent our communities, Mr. Speaker. So I look forward to those discussions, and I thank the government House Leader for bringing this forward to address the issues. I know my colleague has a few words on the public account, so I didn't get into that so much, but I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would start off by saying that I think this health committee is a good idea. I know it won't interfere with the mandate of the Public Accounts Committee, which I think the big difference between these two committees, with public accounts, people working for government, whether they're in the health department or with the health authority, will still be able to be called as witnesses to the Public Accounts Committee to testify and to answer questions about how the public's money is spent in delivering health services. With this new committee, I think the biggest challenge, because when you consider that upwards of 45% of the provincial budget is spent on health, there's going to be many, many people want to present to this new committee. People that want to present that may not be on the priority list for government or the opposition, for that matter, in terms of solving what many members here would refer to as the healthcare crisis. So, the health crisis. I'm not going to say that because it would be. But my point being, Mr. Speaker, that I think one thing that the government should be thinking about in setting up this committee is managing the expectations of the many, many people that are going to want to come in and have their say. And the committee is going to have to direct who they want in. They're going to have to prioritize who they want in because there are issues that need to be solved. Some issues are more important than others. And so I just want to make that point, and also the point that as I look over at the Vice Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, about the importance of acknowledging that this committee will not be interfering with the Public Accounts Committee's mandate. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support this committee. Legislative committees are an important tool. We need to use them more effectively and more broadly. There's a number of committees of the legislature already. There's a Community Services Committee, Economic Development Committee, Public Accounts Committee, Human Resources Committee, Veterans Affairs Committee. When you talk to Nova Scotians and you ask them about committees of the legislature, their eyes might gloss over a little bit. They don't really understand what happens at a committee. They don't necessarily understand the value of a committee. And even with our Law Amendments Committee, which is the opportunity of Nova Scotians to come to Province House and appear before legislators and talk about their concerns with legislation that's before this House, most Nova Scotians really aren't aware of that right that they have, of that possibility they have. So when you think of the list of committees that we have, and how they are used and how they are communicated to Nova Scotians, we do need to modernize the structure. And as my colleague from Inverness pointed out, a new health committee should not be to the detriment of existing committees in the House already, but it should be in addition. So I'm glad to see the government side moving forward with the acknowledgement that we need to look at our committee structure. I'm glad to see them moving forward by establishing a committee on health. It's a major expenditure of the province now and into the future. There's major issues. There's major opportunities in healthcare, and Nova Scotians have a lot of ideas on healthcare, and they know where the issues are, and they can be part of the solutions. I also believe that it's time for a committee on education. So when we look at how we are offering up opportunities for Nova Scotians to communicate with this chamber, it is time to refresh and renew, and it is time to make sure that Nova Scotians know that they have the ability to appear here and have their voice totally heard and documented. And I do agree that that's an important thing that will ease the conscience of a lot of Nova Scotians, because a lot of times I find in my role as an MLA, people don't, members of this chamber would know, people don't often go to their MLA's office on their best day. They usually go when there's an issue and they want to be heard on that issue. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree with them, but they certainly want to know where they stand. So when I find that with my own constituents, when they come to my office, I'll listen to them, I'll understand their perspective, and then we'll either agree and I can help, or I agree but I can't help maybe, or I disagree. But they want to know where they stand. And I think the committees of the legislature around the Law Amendments Committee is an opportunity for Nova Scotians to come and have their voice heard. Maybe the government doesn't agree with them, but at least they've been heard. And I think if we are always looking to improve the way we deliver services as a government, improve the effectiveness of the money that's spent by government, then we can only do that by listening to Nova Scotians. And the committees are a powerful, powerful tool. And I applaud the government for moving forward with a health committee. I'm sure the devil will be in the details of how they structure that committee and how they use that committee. But I think the intention to establish it is a good one. I'm happy to see that. I would like them to continue with the restructuring of some of the other committees to make sure that they're effective. So I thank the government for moving forward with this committee, and would offer that we'd be here to help them structure some of the details of how it may operate, and hopefully we can work together on some of that to make sure that we get the results from such a committee, and that Nova Scotians feel welcome to come and present and be part of that and sit in the gallery and watch or listen or whatever the case may be, so that they know how their government is making decisions. That's an important thing. So thank you to the government for bringing this forward, and we're here to help. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time to recognize the Honourable Government House Leader will be to close debate on resolution number 50. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's my honour and privilege to speak quickly on this resolution and to close debate. I do want to thank the opposition House Leaders, the member for Pictou East and the member for Inverness for their comments. And it's certainly nice to know that on issues of this importance that we're on the same page. I think that the words opportunity, chance for the Nova Scotia, the public, to have better access and really to reform what's been in place for, I think the member from the NDP House Leader, member from Sackville-Cobequid, said it's been 30 years, a number of decades since these structural changes have taken place. And again, really with the Health Committee, we know this is a topic and an issue that's very live, very important, critical for many Nova Scotians, and having a standing committee that reflects those issues is of critical nature, and the time for that is now. And to the member for Pictou East and for Inverness who do sit on public accounts, I think that your points are well taken about the importance of public accounts, and I would argue that maybe this is an opportunity to strengthen what we do there in terms of the fiscal management, of seeing the numbers, of understanding and having a better sense of what's important to Nova Scotians. And I know that the Auditor General, Michael Pickup, has reached out to the House Leaders and I think some members of public accounts on having the discussions about how he could better serve this House and the people of Nova Scotia, and I think that consultation is important. I would love to hear from him directly about how he sees public accounts changing, improving, altering its format in whatever way, or how the agenda set, any of those things to encompass what he sees as being the critical pieces of information, presentations, presenters, topics that are relevant for public accounts. And having a separation between public accounts and health certainly doesn't mean that we completely eliminate those things from each other's mandate, so to speak. So there will be opportunities for presentations and for things to come forward at public accounts that may be health related, but certainly with respect to the Health Committee, that would be the place where a lot of those health issues are housed and heard. In closing, this certainly will be an exercise in cooperation. I've said to the media, I've said to my colleagues, House Leaders, that we have no agenda here. The only reason we brought this forward over the summer, talking about some of the committee's forms and structure and reforms that we could bring to the House, combining economic development and natural resources made sense with where we're at in terms of our resource development here in the province, and of course the Health Committee, which has been a live debate and a live request for a long time now. So it made sense to do this, and then that we would do this in principle with this resolution and backfill with some of the details. So I certainly trust that my colleagues opposite the House Leaders and I can sit down, talk about some of these issues. Quite frankly, for me, I looked at the Health Committee being a status quo standing committee only because I wouldn't know the difference, and I don't sit on public accounts, so I don't know what the structures are that drastically different, other than, of course, the public presentation, the chair's role, etc. So I think that this is an opportunity to talk about things like schedule, composition, how the agenda is set, all of those things that matter to the opposition, of course, the government and the people of Nova Scotia. And again, I certainly agree that this is the chance to get that right and make some of these changes. And again, with respect to our conversations with House leaders, the member for Inverness referenced managing expectations. I think that in some of that sort of structure setting and understanding what the best way is to proceed with this committee and how we can improve public accounts, I think that's how we manage expectations, by getting the structure right and having a format that is workable for all sides of the House and the stakeholders who will want to come present to any of our committees, quite frankly. So I think this is a good chance to work together on this. I've given our commitment to the opposition that we're only in this for the right reasons in terms of bolstering these committees and having something that Nova Scotians can access when information and issues are critical and dire, and they want to get something to the floor of the House and in front of all Nova Scotians. So this is a great opportunity for us. I do appreciate the opposition's cooperation on this. I know that we'll sit together very quickly to start to form how we're going to go about this and some of the detail that we need to finalize this committee and get this up and running as soon as possible. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I close the debate on this resolution. Thanks.
Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
We'll now call public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 16, Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Protection Act?
We'll now call Bill number 16, the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Protection Act. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill 16, the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Protection Act, be read a second time. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to speak to this bill today. This is new legislation for Nova Scotia, and with it we will become only the third province in the country to have legislation that prohibits the use of harmful interventions on young people who are 2SL LGBTIQ+. This legislation will protect the rights of young Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. The Act will specifically prohibit the use of practices that would try to change the sexual orientation or gender identity of a young person under the age of 19. These harmful practices have no place in our province. These are not legitimate services, Mr. Speaker. There is a pressing and substantial need to protect young people from these harms. Earlier this summer, a practice inappropriately referred to as conversion therapy was in the headlines when it was reported in the media that a Bible camp had invited speakers to the camp from outside the country to talk about this disturbing practice. I think most Nova Scotians were deeply troubled by this, Mr. Speaker. I know I was. And I know my friends and colleagues in government and in opposition felt the same. In fact, to the credit of all members of this House, we are all galvanized to act on this matter. I would be hard-pressed to think of a time when all three parties introduced legislation within days of each other to address an issue of such mutual concern. I congratulate each of the opposition parties, as well as my own colleagues, advocates, and ordinary Nova Scotians for recognizing the dangers to our youth and for their quick action to look for a legislative remedy to this clear threat to young Nova Scotians who identify as 2SL LGBTIQ+. Although our bills may differ, Mr. Speaker, we are all one on this. We recognize the threat to our children, and we are taking steps to protect them. So as I mentioned, the news of this harmful practice served as a wake-up call for all in the province. It caused us to ask the question, are we doing enough to protect our friends, neighbours, and family members in the 2SL LGBTIQ+ community? It especially highlighted the fact that as a province, we did not have legislation in place to better protect young people, some of whom are at a vulnerable stage of their adolescence, and for others, still exploring and discovering their sexual orientation and gender identity. These practices and interventions imply that being 2SL LGBTIQ+, two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex, queer, or plus, is an affliction. We all know this is not true, Mr. Speaker. These interventions are harmful to both the mental and physical health of young people, and have been widely condemned by human rights and credible health organizations quite literally around the world. the World Health Organization, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Medical Association, and the Canadian Psychological Association, as well as many, many others. As I told the media when we introduced this bill on Tuesday, a person's sexual orientation is something to be respected, especially in a proudly diverse and inclusive province like Nova Scotia. We are a province that cherishes and embraces the uniqueness of every individual, Mr. Speaker. We want our youth to be proud of who they are and to know they have their community and their government standing behind them. This legislation will specifically prohibit people in a position of trust or authority from providing this discredited and illegitimate intervention to individuals under the age of majority, which in Nova Scotia is 19. This will protect the emotional and psychological health of children and youth, we know a vulnerable group in our society. The bill will also prohibit regulated health professionals from offering this intervention to young people. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Nova Scotia has declared strongly its opposition to this kind of intervention and that they have no place in the practice of medicine. Our legislation supports that stance and makes it clear that these interventions are also prohibited by law. The legislation we are debating today will also enshrine in the law that these false and hurtful interventions are not medically insurable services within Nova Scotia. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the bill will ensure that no public money will be used to support organizations providing these harmful practices. It makes it clear, Mr. Speaker, that substitute decision makers and parents or guardians cannot consent to these practices. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, the bill specifically protects and excludes services that are aimed to support, counsel, and help people cope, as well as gender-confirming surgeries and associated services. Mr. Speaker, this is the right thing to do. We consulted on this legislation, Mr. Speaker. We received important input and feedback from members of the 2SL LGBTIQ+ community, the health sector, and academia. Based on what we heard, we have landed on this bill as it is presented to this House. Some have said that this legislation, once passed, will be the most progressive in the country, and that's an accurate assumption or an accurate assessment, Mr. Speaker. No other legislation in the country addressing people in positions of authority or in trust or prohibits the use of public funds to cover the cost of any change effort exists. There has been some criticism over the exceptions outlined in the bill, and I acknowledge those, Mr. Speaker. Even some people who strongly support this bill would like for us to have gone even further by making no exceptions to anyone under 19. The fact, Mr. Speaker, is health laws across Canada have to be respected. They are set out by the Supreme Court of Canada and has recognized that in some situations, people under the age of majority can be capable of consenting to decisions about their own health. It is a well-understood health law concept that a mature minor can be capable of giving consent on their own care as early as 12 years of age. Our legislation goes further, Mr. Speaker, and has limited the exception to those 16 and over in order to protect them from this harmful practice. Mr. Speaker, we believe this is a balance to ensure we are protecting young people while respecting their autonomy at a certain level of maturity. Our provision is both stronger than the Ontario legislation and the legislation proposed in the Progressive Conservative bill because we've set that exception at those 16 and over. Both the Ontario legislation and the Progressive Conservative bill have exceptions, Mr. Speaker, but they are silent on the age and therefore leave people between the ages of 12 and 16 vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, the legislation we have tabled is a good piece of legislation, and we believe that. The community has provided that feedback and endorses that. It strikes the right balance. It is strong, it is progressive, but it is not so rigid that it takes away the rights of mature individuals who are deemed able to give consent to make decisions about their own care. With this legislation, Mr. Speaker, we are demonstrating clear and unequivocal support for and a commitment to maintaining the rights of the 2SL LGBTIQ+ individuals. With it, Mr. Speaker, we are standing against harmful social attitudes, the negative historical narratives, and the widespread discrimination of this community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is with great honour and privilege that I rise to speak on Bill 16, respecting sexual orientation and gender identity protection. And I just want to say that I'm thrilled that this is here. Thrilled. This is something that's been on my radar for a long time. And we really have to look at this as a nonpartisan bill. This bill has everything to do with human decency. And I'm so pleased to know that all parties in this chamber agree to ban gay conversion therapy. I was asked in an interview a few days ago if I, felt, why is everyone introducing this bill after we've been out speaking on it for months? And I said, you know what, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter who brings the bill to this floor. It's that we work together collectively and create the most comprehensive bill possible to ensure that we're protecting our youth and ban this really horrific practice. So, Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of full disclosure, I will share a story with the members about my very first gay pride parade. I believe it was 1991. I was living in Portland, Maine, working for the Department of Tourism and Culture for the province of Nova Scotia. And a friend of mine who lived and grew up in Maine asked if I wanted to hang with them and their friends on this particular Saturday. So I attended my first local gay pride parade. Eager to know what this was all about, I happily joined them. And I have to admit, it is an experience and memory that was most fabulous, jovial, sincere, hilarious, meaningful experience of my life. After this experience, my circle of friends became more diverse, which allowed me to innately open my heart to a world that perhaps I truly wasn't familiar with growing up and living in rural Nova Scotia, which, by the way, I loved, but it certainly did open up my heart. It was in the 1990s that I learned about gay conversion therapy. And for those of you who would like to know what it is, I can explain. It is a practice of trying to change individual sexual orientation from homosexual or bisexual using psychological or spiritual interventions. There are secular organizations that promote conversion therapy as well as fundamentalist religious groups. I have friends who have gone through gay conversion therapy. I am not certain I can even try or put into words to describe how this experience played a colossal negative role in their lives. We all know, the statistics are out there, that many youths struggling with their sexuality or have been made to go to counseling, therapy, end up depressed, usually become addicted to alcohol, drugs. The suicidal rates are skyrocketing, and it's scary. And there is much evidence to prove such interventions are actually truly harmful. And as a result, conversion therapies should not be part of any behavioral health treatment of children or adolescents. In 2012, the World Health Organization wrote a position statement that included reparative or conversion therapies have no medical indication and represent a severe threat to the health and human rights of the affected persons. They constitute unjustifiable practices that should be denounced and subject to adequate sanctions and actual penalties. Now, Mr. Speaker, that is a pretty solid statement from the World Health Organization. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that there is no greater gift than feeling a sense of belonging. And I often say there is no greater freedom than the freedom to be yourself and to know that you are unconditionally loved for who you authentically are. I want to just let everyone know that there's this incredible movie coming out in November. It's called Boy Erased. And Russell Crowe and Nicole Kidman are in it. And if you have an opportunity just to Google and look at the trailer of this movie, it's, I'm certain if you have an opportunity to go watch it, it will it will be heart-wrenching, actually. So we all know that Ontario, Manitoba, Vancouver actually too has banned this practice, and my understanding that there are many provinces where we are today, and that is to find the most comprehensible bill possible. And I like the bill. I'm very, very happy with the bill. A little concerned about the age, but as stated, I think there's some federal reasons around that. It's unfortunate because I do think it should be 19 and under. So together we will be protecting future generations from this practice and making our relationship stronger and sincere with our gay youth and the LGBTQ2 community. And we are together doing the right thing, and I look forward to listening to some of the presenters that I know that will be coming to law amendments. And thank you so much. We are doing the right thing here today, and I thank the minister. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I also want to thank the Minister of Justice for bringing forward this very important and essential legislation, an act respecting sexual orientation and gender identity protection. I'm not going to say too much that repeats what my colleagues have already said. We know that this is a bill that's important to pass and pass quickly for the protection of Nova Scotians. I really appreciate that the government has listened to the calls from the opposition on this issue and has tabled this legislation. And clearly it's a matter that is important to everyone here. From the perspective of some people, and we talk about living in Facebook bubbles and that kind of thing these days, but you know, it seems that we've come a long way when it comes to LGBTQ rights and the protections of LGBTQ communities. When I was in high school in the 1990s, I know you don't believe that, there was no one openly queer in my high school. And now a generation later, we see GSAs and, you know, in many schools and, across the province and the country, we see young people who being gay or trans is no big deal. And you see the streets packed with members of the queer community and their allies, their families, their children out at pride parades throughout the country. Our Pride Parade is an amazing celebration here in Halifax. This year, I was especially taken by the many young people standing on the streets with T-shirts that said things like, well, parents wearing T-shirts that said things like, "I'm proud of my queer kid," or a great one that I saw where a young woman was wearing a T-shirt that said, "My mother knows," and I was very moved by those shirts. It's a different time. And so when I posted information on my Facebook page about this legislation, there were many comments where people were shocked that this type of therapy actually happens, and why do we even need this legislation? Because surely to God, this doesn't happen in, in Canada in our society. But in fact, of course, we know that it does happen. We know that, with all of the media attention around the camp in Pugwash this summer, but also we know from firsthand accounts of people in our province who have been subjected and who are subjected to conversion therapy. And we also know that it's not just young people that this is happening to. People who are coming out or struggling with gender identity or sexual orientation, this happens at all ages, Mr. Speaker, and so we need to make sure that this therapy, so-called therapy, this practice is not happening to anybody. We want to make sure that we're putting protections in place for all Nova Scotians. Yes, I agree that youth are particularly vulnerable to this, but we do know of many situations where people who are over the age of majority are also being subject to this dangerous, harmful, and of course unnecessary practice. I also have concerns about a couple of aspects of the bill, but I also, before I talk about that, I do want to say that one of the strongest points of the bill that I really appreciate is clause number 7, where it says no person in a position of trust or authority towards a young person under the age of 19 shall make any change effort with respect to that young person. I think that's a really, really important clause. This will make sure that camp counselors are not allowed to engage in this kind of practice, teachers, religious leaders, I would suspect, and I think it's an essential part, so I thank you for including it. Of course, like my colleague, the leader of the PCs, my biggest concern is around the age of 16 to 18, that age of consent. I also understand why it's in there, but I have been talking to many people in the community who really want to see that go. And so I look forward to continuing talks with people in the queer community, listening to folks who show up at law amendments. I know there will be many. There are many people who care about this legislation and want it to pass quickly, and I look forward to working with all parties to make this bill as strong and as effective as it can be. Thank you very much.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice will be to close second reading on Bill number 16, Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Protection Act. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleagues from both Pictou West and Dartmouth North for their comments. I think we all, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, are looking to achieve the same outcomes, and although there may be a differing of opinion around the age, we do have to respect some of the decisions out of the Supreme Court of Canada around mature minors, whether we agree with it or not. So I accept the thoughts and the positions that my colleagues have advanced. The challenge that we would face, Mr. Speaker, if we were actually to remove the clause that references the exception for 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, by default, then all of 12 to 18-year-olds inclusive become vulnerable to these most inappropriate practices. And I would say to all of us in the legislature and to those Nova Scotians, particularly those who are impacted from the 2S LGBTIQ+ community, this has been an education for many people. I've had a number of people stop me in the street and endorse the discussions that all three parties are advancing. This, to my colleague's comment from Pictou West, this is not a political position, Mr. Speaker. This is very apolitical. This is a concern that many people have identified and addressed and support the legislation. And I would only offer, for the benefit of all of us, that the terminology and the language, as inappropriate as it is, conversion therapy, is terminology that the 2SL LGBTQ+ community actually takes exception to. And I'm very careful in limiting the use of that terminology, and would only ask in our future discussions that we avoid that terminology, because in many ways it is actually endorsing it as a recognized therapy. And the language that that Kate Schuon and others have shared with me, Mr. Speaker, they've been very helpful through multiple discussions around these types of very sensitive issues. But the language that we are using to displace the common reference is sexual orientation, gender identity change efforts. And if we could use that terminology going forward, Mr. Speaker, it would be helpful to the discussion. And I know in part on each and every one of us a little more knowledge and understanding of the challenges that our adolescent face and the challenges that this community faces. So with that, Mr. Speaker, and those few comments, I move to close debate on Bill 16.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 16, the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Protection Act. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 16, entitled An Act Respecting Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Protection.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 23, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act?
We'll now call Bill number 23, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement and Implementation Act. The Honourable Minister of Trade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's certainly a pleasure to rise and speak on this bill, Canadian Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act. Obviously, with respect to NAFTA, some of the international partnerships and trade agreements that we're working toward and involved in, while this seems to be a pretty standard piece of legislation and act within the Federation, it's certainly one that's important and that keeps Nova Scotia in a good standing, good position as it relates to our sister provinces and territories in terms of trade and the interprovincial and trade that happens here within Canada. So I'm very proud to be on my feet today to talk about this particular piece of legislation. The Canadian Free Trade Agreement entered into force officially on July 1st, 2017. After a federal, provincial and territorial negotiation to strengthen and modernize the agreement on internal trade. The agreement works to enhance interprovincial commerce, a key driver of economic growth, something Nova Scotia supports wholeheartedly. This legislation meets our province's obligation under the agreement to ensure it's enforceable in Nova Scotia. All provinces and territories and the federal government have committed to a similar enforcement mechanism to be in place by December 31st, 2018. At its core, Canada's new internal trade framework is designed to do four things: enhance the flow of goods and services, investment and labour mobility, eliminate technical barriers to trade, greatly expand procurement coverage, and promote regulatory cooperation within Canada. Trade between provinces and territories play a central role in supporting jobs and economic growth in all corners of this great country. In fact, it amounts to $370 billion, representing roughly 18% of Canada's GDP. The domestic market is very important to Nova Scotia businesses, and in 2016, over half of our trade was interprovincial, totaling more than $8.4 billion in exports of goods and services. And that's why it is of critical importance that I move that Bill 23 be now read a second time, Mr. Speaker. Goods flow from Nova Scotia businesses to offer provinces, not just to be consumed here, but also to be used in other provinces and other products destined for international markets. We are working to ensure our province has the workforce it needs to compete in the global economy, and by removing barriers to labour mobility, it helps Nova Scotians work in other parts of Canada. And it also enables certified professionals from across Canada to live and to work here in Nova Scotia. It is important that we look for economic growth opportunities, and this modernized agreement helps us do just that. To put it simply, Mr. Speaker, fewer barriers to trade, investment and labour mobility within Canada creates jobs and opportunities for our province. We recognize the critical importance of the domestic market to our economy, and we are viewed as leaders in advancing the core objectives of the CFTA. In fact, this summer at the meeting of Canadian premiers, Premier McNeil agreed to, the Premier of Nova Scotia, agreed to take a leadership role in advancing an accelerated internal trade agenda with Manitoba Premier Pallister. I'm also looking forward to assuming the chair role of the Ministerial Committee on Internal Trade in January 2019, where I will lead my federal, provincial, territorial counterparts to further address internal trade barriers. With respect to the legislation, the proposed Act focuses on implementing the dispute resolution articles. The proposed legislation takes steps to ensure dispute resolution orders are legally enforceable, meaning that if a panel awarded monetary penalties against the government, the order would have the same force in Nova Scotia as an order of the local courts. This feature of the agreement is an incentive for all jurisdictions to abide by the agreement's rules, and that benefits business, Mr. Speaker. It also addresses certain administrative issues like appointing dispute resolution adjudicators. There are also labour mobility compliance provisions that balance the interests of regulators in setting and enforcing professional standards with the need to ensure that government's obligations under the agreement are met. The labour mobility provisions reflect the CFTA obligations that enable individuals to move throughout Canada in their certified occupation and encourage the provincial alignment of professional standards. These are the same obligations regulators have had since the 2009 amendments to the AIT. By formalizing them in legislation, however, we can add new tools to help regulators and government meet these very important obligations. For instance, there shouldn't be any reason why an architect or an engineer cannot easily move from anywhere in Canada to Nova Scotia and be able to meet the certification requirements so they can begin working here. National and local stakeholder groups are advocates of this modernized internal trade agreement and were engaged throughout the negotiation process. In order for businesses to benefit from CFTA, compliance with the agreement's obligations by all jurisdictions and enforceable dispute settlement is very much necessary. In closing, Mr. Speaker, this legislation accomplishes three main goals. It helps the province meet its obligation by making dispute resolution enforceable. It signifies the province's acceptance of the legislative requirements and moves Nova Scotia forward to help improve the province's economic growth and export growth. And it supports the government's commitment to encourage interprovincial trade by promoting Nova Scotia's trade interests, cultivating existing ties, and advancing new trade opportunities for our province. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Minister for his commentaries on an act to implement the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. And I also thank Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to give these few words towards this act. A market-based economic growth is generally very favoured, obviously, by progressive Conservative government, and it can be double-edged sword, however, when workers from other provinces come work here, or if outside companies win contracts and we're not prepared to be able to bid at the same standards. A key battleground is movement of alcohol, a growing sector in Nova Scotia, and provinces which have exclusive government-run sales work hard to protect their market share from other provinces' products and prices. The Supreme Court recently upheld New Brunswick's right to limit alcohol entry from Quebec. So we all like to know how this agreement and legislation will address that. There are specific timelines set out in this agreement, yet these appear to be in the creation of processes and groups primarily. So I have a question, and we should all have a question about how this bill actually accomplishes and what it actually accomplishes for Nova Scotia businesses and workers. I have a lot of questions overall about this bill. This bill, obviously, at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, has a really huge impact on our province, and it's extremely important that it's rolled out well and that we adhere to timelines. I'm not sure exactly what the actual plan is regarding the enactment of this bill. I do know that we're already behind schedule with regard to timelines of putting certain things into an effect. I know that the CFTA came into effect in July of 2017, and we have not adhered, obviously, to putting together some of the timeline requests by a year later, so we're already behind schedule. So the federal Trudeau government signed off on the agreement in July of 2017, and we were required to have legislation to be in effect, obviously, by the end of December of this year. So I'm really hoping that this is just not something that we're trying to push through really quickly here without having an overall plan. There seems to be an underlying theme with this government of having, these grand ideas, and ideas are all well and fine. However, if you don't have a plan in place to make sure that you can implement, obviously, the changes that you're putting forward, it causes hardship and undue stress on the people of Nova Scotia. We've been burned in the past, Mr. Speaker. I know that voting for Liberal bills that appear to be supported by our principles
only to find out that there's very little happening beyond the passage of the bill, or that it actually has made things quite worse. My Liberal predecessor, for example, proudly passed an economic development bill that trumpeted the fulfillment of a campaign promise made by the Premier, and it extended the film tax incentive credit. I think we all remember what happened after that. I was reminded of that yesterday when I attended the opening for the Atlantic Film Festival, and it was a very proud moment for me to actually go to the train station yesterday after the House rose and go and pick up my 28-year-old son, who used to work in the film industry here in Nova Scotia. But unfortunately, as so many of my other friends and colleagues, as I used to work in the film industry myself, have had to move to other places within Canada to be able to continue their work because of the decimation that happened in our film industry. And I'm sure that perhaps my colleagues across the floor wouldn't agree with me, but with the spending of the same amount of money basically currently in the film industry from the province, we're definitely not getting the same return on our investment. It's nice to see that my son has come home for a while. It's nice to see that there are still some people in that theater last night that are here and still being able to work in the film industry. But it saddened me that there were so many other faces that were not there, Mr. Speaker, any longer. A few short months later, after this government made that promise to extend the film tax incentive credit, same government gutted it, and with it the multi-layer return on investment. It's quite ironic, really. The government missed the economic point by a country mile, and now they spend as much as ever on the industry, but so many fewer people live and work here year-round in that industry any longer. So while it is so tempting to jump at the possibility that this bill will actually lead to a better economic outcome in this province, we need government to engage in this debate and answer some key questions. All members in this House, I think, would agree with me that we need to see more opportunities for Nova Scotia businesses across Canada, and in enhancing, obviously, business in this province, making them stronger in interprovincial trade. It actually gives them a platform to be stronger, obviously, on an international stage as well. But will this legislation accomplish that? I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker. In this legislation, another media relations plan, I'm not 100% sure about that either. I know we're being pushed, and there's an obligation again to put this act and this bill into place. We have an obligation to do that to the rest of the provinces in Canada to make certain that this is in place before the end of this year. But again, I would like to see what the rollout plan is on this. It's all well and fine to put legislation forward in this House, but what's the plan to enact this on a provincial scale? We still have some of the highest commercial tax rates and personal tax rates that we have across Canada. It makes it very difficult for businesses and even just regular people to survive here in this province. And that's just the reality of things at the moment. We don't talk, I think, enough about what the average person is going through in trying to just make ends meet on a daily basis. When you have higher taxes that you have to pay on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, it makes it really difficult to think that you can be competitive on a national scale. We do have a growing need for skilled tradespeople in Nova Scotia, and our strong post-secondary education is important. It's very important. We have a wonderful post-secondary education in this province. We should all be very proud of it. And it's important for Nova Scotia to be part of a national labour mobility program, and which will be part of this agreement. We need to attract more workers to come back home and from other provinces, but this is a vicious circle, Mr. Speaker. With the jobs numbers declining in this province, and we have no jobs plan, which I said again yesterday and I'll state it again and again, with no jobs plan for this province, what worker is going to be attracted back to Nova Scotia? Who is it that we're exactly trying to attract back to our province? This bill applies broadly to workers who hold certificates, licenses, registrations, or other forms of official recognition issued to the worker by a regulatory authority in a Canadian jurisdiction. So let's consider that for a moment. Tradespersons, skilled workers, doctors, nurses, health professionals, without a plan for jobs in this province, who is the government exactly trying to target? And just as importantly, which sectors and workers in Nova Scotia are left the most vulnerable? Mr. Speaker, government messaging needs to be stronger when it comes to supporting businesses with their labour needs and what programs are available to secure workers to grow our economy. We are not hitting our targets with regard to our immigration strategy. Government brought in legislation because the agreement, again, was signed in 2017, and it requires the implementation of this legislation to be enforced by December 31st of this year. 18 months for this government to simply update the existing law, but I want to know, when does the rubber actually meet the road? The government appears to have no idea of when regulations will be ready when the agreement came into effect by July of 2017. So the Trade Minister is responsible for the CFTA. I've read this in the agreement, in the Act, sorry. The Trade Minister is responsible for the CFTA and the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education for Labour Mobility. To me, this diffuses the accountability even further. Mr. Speaker, I know that we have to go through law amendments with this bill, and I really look forward to the presentations that will come from stakeholders, and I certainly hope that people will come forward. I look forward to hearing from them. This is an extremely important piece of legislation that we are bringing forward in this province. Again, without a plan for how we're going to be able to roll out jobs in this province, without a plan of how to put more people to work, I'm really concerned about how this will affect us at the end of the day. The trust me kind of messaging that's coming from government, to me anyway, is no longer an acceptable response. With that, Mr. Speaker, I wish for all of us to be able to actually have an informed decision when it comes to being able to put legislation not only forward, but before it's enacted in this province. I said it a couple of days ago, and I'll say it again. These are such important pieces of legislation. They affect every single household in this province. They will affect every single business in this province. They will affect us for a long time to come. We are under an obligation federally to be able to enact our obligations within Canada to the other provinces. We need to make 100% certain that we get this right. So I look forward to further debate, and I look forward to further presentations for those people who do come forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Glad to rise and speak a few moments on Bill 23. The Canadian Free Trade Implementation Act is actually a requirement of the agreement that our province signed on to and are working under well over a year ago. I believe last July is when the province started to abide by the agreement that was signed by jurisdictions across the province. And one of the criticisms I do have about seeing this piece of legislation and this bill now is that we've had two sessions of the legislative process that I think would have been a better timeline for a piece of legislation like this to be brought in. Of course, having legislation prior to actually doing what's in the agreement probably would be optimal, but I understand how complex it is around getting agreements across the jurisdictions here in the province and or in the country, and of course with the federal government. But saying that, as I said, it's been well over a year. And my concern with the timing would be that if this legislation isn't up to par, or if it doesn't meet the requirements of the agreement that we signed on to, this is the only session we have by the end of the year. By the end of December 31st, provinces across the country who have signed on to the agreement are required to have standalone legislation that reflects what's in that agreement. So if there is an issue that is unforeseen right now as we debate this, we would have to have an emergency session of the legislature, I guess, to be called back to address it. Where if we would have seen it last spring or last fall, those who will be impacted by this, and there are many, and I think many Nova Scotians may hear Bill 23, the Canadian Free Trade Implementation Act, and say, well, that doesn't pertain to me. I'm not into export. I'm not into. I don't own a business, but it does affect them, and it does have ramifications on their daily lives and on the flow of the economy here in Nova Scotia. So that's one of the concerns, is the timing. We're only 3 months shy of the drop dead date of the requirement of having a standalone piece of legislation. So not much time to change it if there is need for change into the future, Mr. Speaker. Of course, this legislation is based, from what we understand, on the British Columbia model, Manitoba, Ontario, and Newfoundland, Labrador, and PEI model. And regional cooperation, especially national cooperation, is important, especially with this trade agreement. But regional cooperation is extremely important for our province, and it's something that previous governments recognized a number of years ago, and has worked extremely hard to make sure that as a region, especially the Atlantic region here in Canada, that we work together, that we kind of team up to make sure that we're not left out on some of the major national issues and discussion that happens around trade and other things that affect Nova Scotia. And I know for myself in government that I worked extremely hard with my colleagues in New Brunswick and PEI and Newfoundland Labrador, Mr. Speaker, to try to make sure that we improve the way we do business in Nova Scotia, improve the way we provide services for our citizens, because we want to make sure that we can provide the services here in Nova Scotia. We can support the economy and our business community here in Nova Scotia as other jurisdictions do, maybe the bigger jurisdictions in Upper Canada or out west, Mr. Speaker. And that's why I think a number of governments, previous governments, and this government, I believe, is working in the same manner of making sure that cooperative, regional cooperation is top of mind when we're looking at how do we best serve the citizens of our province, Mr. Speaker. One of the things in this bill, of course, and the requirement of the agreement, is to make sure that we have established a monetary penalty for any disputes, and make sure that we have a dispute resolution mechanism in place. And that's an interesting topic, an interesting component of this, because I think that's what's very much at play with the trade agreement, the NAFTA trade agreement with the U.S. The U.S. and President Trump want to get rid of, and I don't know if I think it's Section 19 or that dispute mechanism that we have for NAFTA has been a bone of contention with the current president of the U.S. And that's an extremely important part of any trade agreement, Mr. Speaker, because if there is a disagreement, and of course in Nova Scotia we're going to stand behind the processes, the public policy, the requirements, regulations that we put in place to hopefully best serve the people in Nova Scotia. But if there is a disagreement, for example, between us and New Brunswick or PEI or Quebec or Ontario or the other provinces, that there's a fair way to try to have a resolution to that conflict or that issue at play. And I hope the federal government continue, and I don't like to jump into the federal politics and what's going on, but I hope the federal government stands strong with the ability to make sure that the dispute recognition mechanism is still there in whatever comes out of the NAFTA talks, or whatever President Trump wants to call it in the end, because I guess he doesn't like that NAFTA name. But here in Nova Scotia, it's important for us, and we don't have to look too far. We look to the north of us to look at how trade impacts lives of our citizens. And I think the most notable case over the last couple of years was that of Mr. Comeau in New Brunswick, who went to Quebec and purchased a larger quantity of alcohol than was permitted by the law and transported back across the province into New Brunswick. And of course, he was charged because there are limits set on how much alcohol you can bring into Nova Scotia, into New Brunswick, into Canada if you're coming from the States. And Mr. Comeau took his fight to the Supreme Court. And it's interesting to see that the ruling from the Supreme Court indicated that Canadians do not have a constitutional right to buy and transport alcohol across borders without impediment, meaning that the responsibility and the authority is with the provinces. So the provinces can stand up and say, this is what you're allowed to bring across the province. And we know with that Justice panel, it indicated that the provinces have the right to restrict the importation of goods from another province as long as the primary aim of that restriction is not to impede, which you have to go to lawyers and figure out, well, what does that really mean? Was Mr. Comeau's ability to transport the alcohol quantity he had, was that something that fell within his right, but it clearly shows from the Supreme Court of Canada that the jurisdictions, the provinces, the territories have the ability to make those limitations, put restrictions in place when it comes to trade and when it comes to the economy and the transportation of goods across our province or across our borders. And we know in the last number of years how important that is to allow for our economy here, especially our wine industry, now our growing beer industry that we have here in the province, that there's ability for those individuals, those business owners to get their product out and across the country. And having strong and transparent and open trade agreements hopefully will allow us to do that. And that's why Nova Scotia should be concerned and should have their antennas up when we see trade agreements and trade legislation like this on the books here in Nova Scotia, because it does impact their daily lives. So for example, if you're a Nova Scotian that moved across to another province, hopefully with this agreement and with some of the breakdowns of the barriers that we've had in the past, you'll be able to get product from home, for example. If it's a wine that you like from the valley, that you'll be able to get that. And I know a lot of work has gone into breaking down those barriers over the last number of years. And I think there was a commitment from the premiers to look at beer itself in Atlantic Canada on how do we harmonize and how do we make sure that we have the same limitations, Mr. Speaker, that we have. And in Nova Scotia, where we know New Brunswick has moved in the direction to look at lower beer prices, but Nova Scotia is still pretty high. I'm not saying we need to go like Ontario and their premier there, who leaves a lot to be desired, Mr. Speaker. When you have people in the gallery being handcuffed and removed because they disagree with you, but I won't go there either, Mr. Speaker, but I think it's important, and I know Nova Scotians recognize that the government has a role to play, and that an agreement like this act should hopefully open up the possibilities of ensuring that people are heard. The labour mobility also is extremely important, and we know over the last number of decades we have many Nova Scotians who leave our province to work in other jurisdictions, most notably going out west, working in Alberta and other provinces, Mr. Speaker. And we need to make sure that when they do that, say they finish their training here through NSCC, or if they're in that sector where the education requirements is there, then we have the ability to get them back here. If they are doing their work and they're getting their training in another jurisdiction, that it's easy for them to come home and continue to work in that field. You know, I come from a field of paramedicine that for many years was very restrictive of where you could go and work, and then if you did choose, you had to jump through many hoops and many requirements. Now there are still some barriers, but for the most part, through cooperation and understanding of the educational system of how you become a medic, for example, in Atlantic Canada, that transition is much easier. And you know, we have, especially in Nova Scotia, I know that there is a requirement, and there are some voids in communities that, you know, we need to attract other paramedics to come to the province to make sure that we have coverage here, but vice versa. That if you do choose to leave the province, that, you know, the education you received here, the training you received here is recognized across the country, Mr. Speaker. So we look forward to this going through the process. I hope, and we're putting a lot of confidence in the government that this act meets the requirement, one, of the overall Canada Free Trade Agreement that we signed on to. Nothing we can do, it's a done deal. But two, that it reflects ensuring that Nova Scotians' best interest is being taken care of here, both on the labour mobility aspect, but more importantly, the economy aspect, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't have any barriers for business or for the economy here in Nova Scotia. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Business. It will be to close second reading on Bill number 23, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act. The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleagues across the floor for their comments. And certainly I can appreciate the importance of trade, obviously, in my portfolio. See NAFTA, CFTA, again, all the international agreements that we're part of and the cooperation that we share with many jurisdictions and many regions across the world. So for those watching at home who are riveted by the CFTA discussion and debate, Mr. Speaker, I want them to take don't worry too much about the fear that's been stricken here by the opposition. This is nothing's melting down here. There's nothing to be concerned about. There's not going to be an emergency session overnight. The economy's not going to fall apart. This is okay. The CFTA and the cooperation that has taken place, it was in fact in place, Mr. Speaker, as of last July. What this is about the legislative requirements to make sure that this agreement has teeth, to make sure that when our businesses are in other jurisdictions, they're protected as well, and to make sure that we're being stewards of the market-based trade that we're all very proud of. So. The member from Sackville-Cobequid referenced Chapter 19, a dispute resolution. This is exactly it. This formal gives us the ability and cements us in the process under CFTA, whereby we're participants in that. So if it's not, for some reason, which it will be if it's not fully proclaimed by December 31st, 2018, it's not going to nullify the agreement. Nothing's going to happen with our economy or our businesses. That's the worst case scenario. It means that we wouldn't be formally a part of the dispute resolution mechanism, but we will be, Mr. Speaker. So this is not the pieces around goods, flow of goods and services, and all the things that are connected with interprovincial trade and inside this country in terms of trade with provinces and territories. It's not impacted by this legislation. This is to give teeth. This is to give protection to our businesses with respect to legislative, solidified rules around dispute resolution and how we use the legislature to put that in law, so that when we compete in other jurisdictions and when others compete here, there's an absolute clarity around what exactly the rules are, how fines are imposed, and the like. Again, all the specifics around CFTA have already been settled and figured out. And, Mr. Speaker, BC, New Brunswick, Northwest Territories, and Saskatchewan, they haven't put the CFTA legislation into force yet either. So we're not the only province. We're not the ones that are threatening this whole federation to fall apart and be into chaos over trade opposition. So we're okay here. And the members did reference, rightly so, one of the key pieces for this, and the reason why we had from, even though the agreement was in place July 1st of 2017, the reason why we have until December 31st of this year was to make sure that we were absolutely crystal clear on some issues, and one of those issues is without question labour mobility. So working with my colleague from Labour and Advanced Education to be sure that the regulators in certain sectors, the NDP House Leader referenced paramedics and how that is a great example of the certifications and how the flow of those certifications and ensuring that someone can come to Nova Scotia or a Nova Scotia paramedic can work somewhere else is defined, crystal clear, and the fact that there is legislative teeth to support that mobility. So that was a key part of this. Again, to be very clear, we're not behind on this. We're very much in the game, in the timelines. We will meet all the requirements for the CFTA dispute resolution piece. Finally, just want to reference alcohol. This is one that is very prominent and important to everybody in Nova Scotia, and all of our provinces and territories are concerned about this flow. That's why the Canadian premiers identified our premier as being a champion in this particular area. He will work with Manitoba's Premier Pallister to look at these issues, to work with the other provinces and territories to make sure that we've got a fair, open, transparent system for how alcohol flows from the personal consumption perspective. So that's important, and we'll be a leader on that. We will certainly answer any questions moving through this debate, but I want to be very clear. Nova Scotia has been a leader with respect to NAFTA, working with the national government, Minister Freeland. Our input, our positioning, our support for the Canadian story has been rock solid. It's no different here with interprovincial trade. The CFTA is something that we've been a part of. We've been champions for getting this right. And this particular piece of legislation is the formal and last part of cementing within our province's laws, so we all follow the rules of the game for all provinces and territories in Canada, and that's exactly what this bill does. And with those few remarks, I will close debate on second reading of Bill 23.
Just before we get to the motion, I'm obligated to remind the Minister and all members of this House that we will not be addressing directly the millions of viewers of legislative television, but we'll keep our comments through the chair. The motion is for second reading of Bill number 23, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 23, entitled an act to implement the Canadian Free Trade Agreement.
Ordered that the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 29, the Labour Standards Code?
We'll now call Bill number 29, the Labour Standards Code. The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Speaker, I move that Bill number 29, an act to amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, Labour Standards Code, be read for the second time. I would like to take some time to share with you amendments we're making to the Labour Standard Codes that provide employees with enhanced leaves and better support and care for their families. Nova Scotians want to feel secure in their jobs when they need to care for a new child or a loved one. These changes will not only support Nova Scotians and their families, but will also better align provincial legislation with recently updated federal regulations. Mr. Speaker, the federal EI benefit for pregnant employees is 15 weeks with a 1-week waiting period. This has been reduced from 2 weeks to 1 week. Our legislation will mirror this, and that is why we will also be reducing from 2 weeks to 1 week, and that'll take the totality of it from 17 to 16 weeks. Pregnant employees will see an overall increase in combined pregnancy and parental leave from 52 to 77 weeks. Eligible employees may receive up to 76 weeks with EI benefits. We're also increasing the parental leave from 52 to 77 weeks so that all parents will have an opportunity to take the 77 weeks of leave. And Mr. Speaker, while other provinces afford this luxury to parents who are biological parents, we also include foster parents and we also include adoptive parents. Under the federal EI program changes, eligible employees are able to choose parental benefits paid out over a period of either 35 or 61 weeks. This does not increase the overall amount of EI benefits parents can receive. Parents who choose the 61 weeks of benefits will receive a lower weekly amount of EI than if they had chosen 35 weeks. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Standards Code currently provides for a number of leaves, including compassionate care leave and critically ill child care leave. The amendments we are proposing will create a new 16-week critically ill adult leave. Eligible employees may receive up to 15 weeks of EI benefits, and this new critically ill adult leave will apply to immediate family as well as other relatives and persons who are like family. This will also now capture guardians caring for a child who become critically ill. This broad definition of a family member includes individuals who are like a close relative, whether related by blood, adoption, marriage, common law partner, or not. This same definition applies to compassionate care leave included in our existing legislation. Additionally, this broad definition of a family member to include a person who's like a close relative will also apply to the existing critically ill child leave. This significantly broadens the scope of eligible employees who may provide care and support to their loved ones beyond parents, guardians, foster parents, and persons who have legal care and custody of the child. This change will increase the options available to Nova Scotia families dealing with difficult caregiver situations. The proposed amendments will provide Nova Scotians the time they need to care for their families, knowing that their job will be safe when they return, Mr. Speaker, and that is the essence of this. The changes will allow us to close the gap between the province's protected leaves and the federally available EI benefits. This will help employees in Nova Scotia care for their families while having stronger job security. It is important to know, Mr. Speaker, however, that all Nova Scotians are entitled to leave protection under the bill, regardless of whether they apply and/or are eligible for EI benefits. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to hearing what the opposition has to add to this bill. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to stand here today and speak on Labour Standard Code Bill number 29. In summary, I believe this is just to bring everything up to date with the federal errors, but this bill must be read and careful. Life throws us many challenges, whether planned or unplanned. And knowing government is supportive to your family and your needs, that's the Canadian way and the Nova Scotian way. Understanding family challenges are supported during critical illness, we all support that. In Nova Scotia, we do have to be relevant to the economy situation that we have right now. Economic measures, and whether it's immediate or long-term impacts, we all have to be incumbent on these contexts. On its face, it appears that this is just an administrative nature, yet has far-reaching effects, public and private, with employees and employers. While I feel government thinks they have consulted broadly, I'm not convinced until we hear from the law amendments held. Will this impact Nova Scotian families in a positive way or negative? Positive, I would believe. Will it impact be small or medium on small or medium-based businesses? It's great to be faced with this question, and important to be able to reflect and seek from Nova Scotia's input. Bills such as this appear highly technical, but what really matters is what's inside, the impact that they have at home where we each live. I will reserve my support on this bill until we are able to hear from the stakeholders within Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education for bringing this bill forward, the amendments to the Labour Standards Code. We in the NDP caucus agree that these the three major points that are made with the amendments are good ones. They're positive. Adjusting the pregnancy and parental leave provisions under the Nova Scotia Labour Standards Code to align with changes to the federal EI, extension of parental leave and shortening of EI waiting period from 2 weeks to 1 week is excellent. Thank you very much. It adjusts the caregiving for a critically ill child leave to make immediate family members, relatives, and other persons who are like family, in quotes, eligible. Then this definition of family member also already applies to the compassionate care leave, is excellent. And it adds the caregiving for a critically ill adult leave in line with new EI program. This is good as well because it provides protection for 16 weeks of leave for 15 weeks of federal EI benefits. So we approve of these amendments, and I look forward to seeing the bill come forward to the Law Amendments Committee. Thank you.
I want to recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour. It will be the closed second reading of Bill number 29, the Labour Standards Code. The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank opposition members for their comments. I would like to respond to the Conservative opposition. There was broad consultation done in this bill, and that's why we did not introduce it in the spring session, which would have been 3 months after the federal government made changes to their extended leave for pregnant mothers. And I think the consultations were very positive. While our other neighboring provinces were rushing the bills into legislation, we went out and consulted, and we actually put an enhancement in this bill that's not available in other provinces. The 77 weeks applies to all parents, not just biological parents. The current rules under the federal government are a shorter period for parents who are adoptive parents or foster parents. We felt that they deserve the same extended leave, so we have them captured in our bill. And I do believe we are the only province in the nation who has that in there for adoptive parents and foster parents. Mr. Speaker, I had many people contact my office, many expecting parents, many people who are also currently on paternity leave, and I do want to point out one thing in the bill, that parents who are currently on a paternity leave can, once this bill receives royal assentment when the House rises, they will be eligible for the extended period of paternity leave, so they can change their current situation. I think that's a very big positive. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I rise to close debate on Bill 29. Thank you. Motion is for second reading of Bill number 29, the Labour Standards Code. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 29, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And finally, would you please call Bill number 27, the Animal Protection Act.
We'll now call Bill number 27, the Animal Protection Act. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move second reading of Bill number 27, an act to protect animals and to aid animals in distress. We know that Nova Scotia is among the leaders of animal welfare in Canada. The Animal Defence Fund ranked the province third in the country in 2017. Since the Animal Protection Act was last amended in 2014, we have consulted with stakeholders. I set up a Minister's Forum on Animal Welfare, which include animal welfare advocates, enforcement officials, and other interested parties. They brought concerns forward, and we found these justified. As a result, we're proposing changes that will further strengthen our legislation for animal protection. Under new legislation, animal welfare inspection and enforcement will be stronger. SPA inspectors and police will gain the ability to issue tickets and lay charges immediately for animal fighting. Animal welfare inspectors will be able to enforce court orders related to animal ownership. If the owners of an animal are in violation of a court order, the inspector may take possession of the animal. Inspectors will be able to cross adjacent properties when carrying out their responsibilities. This legislation will ban cosmetic surgery unless medically necessary and carried out by a veterinarian. This includes tail docking, ear cropping, debarking, and declawing. The practice has already been banned in the UK, Europe, and Australia, and is under review in other parts of Canada and in the United States. Nova Scotia has now become the third province to prohibit cosmetic surgery and the first province to ban cat declawing. These changes provide the authority to license kennels, breeding, and animal rescue facilities, along with retail pet stores if necessary in the future. We're clarifying the process for Animal Welfare Appeal Board in the future. Hearings will be held in the open. We believe these will improve transparency and understanding of animal welfare. Without that, families are deeply committed to welfare of their companion animals. I want to thank the Ministers' Forum on Animal Welfare, the Nova Scotia Veterinary Medical Association, the SPCA, the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture for their feedback and support in these changes. Nova Scotians can have confidence that their animals are protected. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the minister opposite for his presentation. It's my honour to speak on the Animal Protection Act, Bill number 27. Mr. Speaker, we've reviewed briefly this act, and we do have some concerns about the definitions and the differences in the act with the companion animals versus the Agricultural Animal Protection Act, and more expenses coming out of this for some of the owners, veterinarian bills and such. We really need to grasp the stakeholders on this from the law amendments perspective, and I think we're going to reserve comment until we do get to speak with those stakeholders at the law amendments. Thank you.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Hello. Hello there. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the NDP spokesperson for agriculture, I'm happy to rise to my feet to speak to this bill today. Bill 27, an act to protect animals and to aid animals in distress. The spirit and intention of this bill is something that we here believe it is a good news story for Nova Scotia, and the NDP is happy to support. Basically, the intention and the spirit of the bill is to protect and improve animal welfare in Nova Scotia. So I can't see why that is not a very good thing. It's a bill that has several different aspects, and our party has received a few concerns about the bill from Nova Scotians who are concerned that aspects of the bill are not carefully thought through and may have unintended consequences. And we will be looking at those concerns, especially during Law Amendments Committee when people come forward, as we hope that the other members in government and the opposition will as well. But we look forward to hearing feedback and suggestions when we do hear from people at the Law Amendments Committee. So overall, we believe in and support the intentions of the bill to do more for animal welfare in Nova Scotia. And the bill coming forward is a testament to the work done by folks like Dr. Hugh Chisholm and the many other animal advocates in our province. And I have to say, I am definitely one. The work that veterinarians, the Nova Scotia SPCA, and so many farmers and animal lovers do right across the province to protect and promote animal welfare is so important to all of us, and I want to thank them all. So on that note, we will leave it to law amendments, and I look forward to bringing the bill forward to that committee. Thank you very much.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you. I'm going to reserve my comments about the bill itself. I had the opportunity to sit in the minister's seat a few times over a few years and understand the challenges between companion animals and animal husbandry when it comes to, of course, our agriculture industry. But my comment really is for the government House Leader. We introduced the bill yesterday. We're debating it in second reading today. It really doesn't give the opposition parties enough time to truly reach out to some of those stakeholders, understand the intricacies of a bill, to truly come up with a yay or a nay when it comes to a bill, of course, of the size of this and the implication that it has not only for thousands of pet owners, but of course for the rural way of life, the rural infrastructure that we have in agriculture. So if anything I can say on this is simply that this is one of those bills that might have taken a couple more days, given us the opportunity to consult with those who need to be consulted with so that we can actually debate it correctly here in the House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, with that, I know that the Law Amendments Committee will have the opportunity to hopefully hear from interested individuals, and I do hope that they're able to come. The indications that we have at this point is that law amendments could happen as early as Monday evening, or Monday afternoon. So we're hoping that those groups are ready to come present on this bill. So with those short comments, I thank you for the opportunity.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Agriculture. It will be for second reading of Bill number 27, the Animal Protection Act. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting to hear the comments from the opposition parties, and they will definitely be taken into consideration as they always are. And with that, I would like to move second reading of Bill number 27.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 27, the Animal Protection Act. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 27, entitled an act to protect animals and to aid animals in distress.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today. I move that the House do now rise to meet again Tuesday, September 18th, between the hours of 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. Following the daily routine in QP, business will include the second reading of Bill 32, an act respecting the control of body armour, followed by address and reply.
Motion is for adjournment for the House to rise to meet again Tuesday, September 18th, between the hours of 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The House now stands adjourned until Tuesday, September 18th at 1 p.m.